The girl Karen stands by the gate admiring a bush of white flowers. She tells her older brother that they are beautiful, and he agrees, bending down and gently plucking one flower from the stem. She gently sticks a flower into Karen's blonde hair and says that it fits perfectly. Karen looks up at him, her cheeks glowing with a blush, and she thanks him with her eyes. When another petal slowly falls from the flower, anxiety instantly appears on Karen's face. Her brother immediately notices and asks, "What happened?" He asks aloud if the flower hurt when it was picked. Her brother, realizing he accidentally upset her, quickly reassures her it's not your fault, and he thinks to himself, "This is a good sign. Karen is truly on the path to becoming a good person." The boy pressed his sister in warm embraces. Around them flickered ghostly images of a stern dark-haired man, a blue-haired maid, and a girl with animal ears. And he silently vows to change the future already determined for her. It turns out, he was reincarnated into the game world as the older brother of the villainous heroine doomed to die, and now, possessing incredible power. He resolutely strives to raise his little sister and rewrite her fate. Dean Shatters, a young man with dark hair, suddenly wakes up, his face twisted as if he had just broken free from a deep sleep. He rubs his eyes and recognizes these ghostly images as visions from a past life, recalling the painful moment when his then-girlfriend demanded that he decide who was more important to him, his sister, or her, seeing that his parents had asked. Seeing this lie, he told her they needed to break up, and although he remembers a loving family, the note on the whiteboard reveals another truth. His parents have exhausting work schedules and often stay out late. When they were not there, he had to replace them, which meant constantly taking care of his sickly younger sister. He remembers nursing her when she had a fever and persuading her to eat carrots at the table. This was always his reality. She remembers that simple, soothing gesture how he held her little hand in his. Memory flows into this moment. He comes home with a bag of groceries and says he will start dinner. From the sofa, his sister coughs weakly, asks for a drink, but immediately corrects herself and asks for a special blend of hot tea, and he gladly agrees. He finds his sister on the couch, completely absorbed in the combat section of a familiar game. She says she is currently playing the Orca route, and he begs her, "Do not transfer your pain onto everything you do." He reaches out his hand, touches her forehead, and realizes she has a fever. He says enough games, let her return to the room and go to sleep, but she protests and says she has already decided to complete the character's route today. He sighs because he sees no other way out. As a compromise, he takes the controller to play for her, and she lies on the couch watching. She says it's a wonderful compromise. While he plays, his sister asks if he likes characters like the villainous Caroline, and he replies that he sees only a pathetic figure in her, someone no one ever loved. On the screen, Caroline laments her defeat before dying, and his sister notices her death as the quietest. His sister's voice cut through the sound of the game. She quietly said that probably in his life things would go wrong in the middle of a match. He turned around, shocked, and told her, "Don't say that." He tried to brush off her grim words with a joke, saying that when she ever brings a guy home, he would be the one to check him out. She weakly objects, saying that should be the dad's job. The cheerful moment fades and becomes harsh reality. In the hospital, his sister Nanami lies in bed under an oxygen mask, extremely weakened. She apologizes for causing him trouble all her life and thanks him. Overwhelmed with emotions, he squeezes her hand, calls her by name, and insists that she was never a burden to him. Her words were the last. He sits hunched in a chair by her hospital bed, her body now motionless and covered with a white sheet. Thus, his sister's life came to an end. The silence of the hospital room is suddenly broken by a sharp phone ring. This call brought even greater tragedy. The voice on the other end reported that his parents had been in an accident. The police suspected they were driving recklessly, trying to reach their daughter in her final moments. And so he was left alone, standing in the rain by their graves. He stopped forming real relationships with anyone. After the sudden death of his sister and parents, a paralyzing fear of losing someone again settled in him, and he hid in quiet solitude, disturbed only by the tapping of the keyboard. His solitary work was interrupted when a colleague grabbed him from behind and insisted he go out drinking with them. He tried to refuse, saying he was busy, but the other did not back down and warned that the management would be offended if he didn't come. At the restaurant, one colleague, Anzekin, proudly showed a photo of his newborn, and the conversation turned to Sadhu. Another employee asked if he was married or had a girlfriend, to which he quietly admitted that his last girlfriend was still in university. She took on the role of matchmaker and pointed to a young woman at their table. Anzakin said that during lunch, this girl found him attractive and suggested just going on a date with her to see if they suited each other. The other woman blushed and was clearly flustered by such attention. He understood what this gathering was really about, politely declined, saying that he was not looking for romance right now. The woman apologized for the pressure, and he replied that probably many people better than him would be found for her. After that conversation, it seemed to him as if a whole field of needles was pricking him. Walking alone through the city at night on his way home, he was once again convinced that it was better for him to be alone, so he decided just to stop by a store for something and go home. And he stepped onto the pedestrian crossing. Dazzling headlights were approaching him. At that last moment, he realized that life was over, and the last thought brought relief. He was glad that he had rejected the girl, thereby sparing her the pain of his death. Consciousness returned, but not to the world he knew. He was reborn as a baby and wondered if this was divine punishment for making that woman cry. Looking around, he found himself in a spacious, luxurious room, and a voice announced that it was time to feed Lord Zex. He shuddered when the maid began feeding him from a bottle. The Western clothes and interior confused him, but she spoke Japanese. It must be Japan, he thought, feeling as if in this new life he had drawn the shortest straw. Lying in the cradle, he processed his new reality. Two people were taking care of him, and he realized that neither of them was his mother. The servant's voice cut through his thoughts and ordered the fool to finish the bottle faster. He overheard the maids whispering. They called him a pathetic, anxious child who never cries or laughs. They looked at his white hair and whispered as if that made him colorless. He could not see but caught every word and wondered what they meant. It was like a blow struck him. Besides being fed, bathed, and having his diapers changed, no one cared about him at all. He felt inside that this was dangerous. He was 27, and he remembered a medieval experiment. Babies left without affection all died before their first year. This realization hardened his resolve. Recalling the pain of a broken heart from his past life, he decided not to get attached to anyone anymore. He would not survive such a loss a second time, and from the very beginning it was better not to start relationships at all. That resolve was immediately tested. Now he was a baby. He watched as the maid brought him a newborn. She called the baby beautiful and announced that it was his sister. That word hit him like a physical blow. He had already decided that he no longer wanted a sister. The shock deepened when a man and a woman entered the room. The woman, his mother, could she really have grown up like that? And the stern man, his father, simply told the maid that she had done enough. When they showered attention on his new little sister and called her cute, the truth struck him like thunder. These were his parents. P. Quiet moment was shattered by the piercing cry of a baby in the cradle. For Zex, this sound was truly loud. His parents, however, were simply irritated. The mother sighed that Carolina was crying again and called her a noisy child. The father suggested going for tea, and she gladly agreed. And that was it. They returned and left. The sound of the closing door echoed through the room. Zex froze, not believing it. He snapped out of his stupor, rushed to the door, and pounded on it with his tiny fists. He couldn't believe it. They were just going to leave the baby alone in such a state. He peeks from behind the wall and listens as two servants talk to each other. They say that Lord Zex and Lady Caroline have already been fed, and their diapers don't need changing yet, so they decide to just leave the children alone in the baby's head. Quiet rage boils, silently screaming at them. Do your job. In the nursery, his irritation grows. His sister screams in the crib, and he tries to ignore it, thinking it's not his problem. The room is strewn with scattered blocks. He looks disdainfully at the offered distraction, takes a picture book, and angrily sees that the words are written in Japanese, a remnant of his past life, then glances at the blocks and wonders. What a strange passion for a man with the mind of 28 years. He sighs. The search for any distraction is over, and he is left with only a simple little rat. He approaches the cradle and carefully extends a rattle to Caroline. Her big, tear-filled eyes look up at him, and the crying quiets for a moment. Her indifference breaks his patience. With a sharp movement, he throws the rattle right at her head, deciding that this is no longer his problem, and let her cry on the blow causes the baby to cry out again, loudly. He turns away, trying to ignore the noise and focus on the book, repeating to himself that it's not his business. But a glance at the clock on the dresser suddenly hits with truth. The time to give Caroline milk has long passed. The realization pushes him into action. He limps to the door and knocks again and again. From the other side, he hears the servants say that Lord Zex is just playing, and with a heavy heart he understands they are deliberately ignoring him. No one responds to the knocking. He notices the rope from the bell used to call the servants, desperately takes a run up and jumps, straining all his strength to reach it. But his small body doesn't reach, and he falls to the floor with a scream. Suddenly the door sharply opens. A maid with dark hair bursts into the room. Zex jumps up, tensely points at his sister, and shouts to be given milk. The maid, slightly stunned, approaches the crib and lifts the crying Carolina, while Zex stands with crossed arms, deeply irritated. He watches as the maid, having finished feeding his sister, announces her departure. For a moment Carolina is satisfied, quietly drinking from her body. The relief lasts briefly. Suddenly, he is pierced by a terrible, disturbing realization: diapers. Reluctantly finishing the task, he looks at Carolyn in her cradle now with a full belly and a clean diaper. She coos happily. He sharply turns away, forcing himself to frown. He insists to himself that it was a one-time thing, justifying that he only helped because her crying annoyed him. To him, but indifference does not recede and no help is in sight. He again takes care of his sleeping sister, tries to read a lullaby from a book, marvels at its strange words, and finally resigns himself, changing her diaper again. He continues reading from the picture book, making sounds of radish and carrot, and to his surprise, Carolina excitedly waves her legs, as if completely enchanted by the story. Time passes. Carolina is now a toddler, and during play with blocks she sits up straight by herself. He joyfully praises her, saying how amazing she is. With a proud smile, she picks up one brick and hands it to him. He accepts the small gift with a gentle, sincere smile and thanks her, and Carolina's smile broadens from their shared happiness. The tender moment is shattered by the sudden appearance of the maid. She explodes, shouting that the room is only for children's things, not for him, then falls into a strange hysteria, lamenting that she is bored and caring for him is her only entertainment. The two children just watch, stunned and silent. He quickly apologizes to his sister. She seems to have been frightened by the maid's scream. Later, lying in bed, he cursed his fate. The maid threw tantrums until she was satisfied. A wave of heat covered him, and with horror he realized he had a fever, probably the flu or something contagious. The main thing for him now was Carolina, sleeping in the crib nearby. She must not be infected. He gets up and knocks on the door, asking for help. A dark-haired maid and a stern man with black hair open it. Zex explains that he has a fever and will infect Caroline if they stay in the same room. But the man replies that without the Lord's permission he cannot move them, although he will call a doctor. Tired of bureaucratic red tape, he stops pretending to be a child and firmly demands that his bed be moved as far away from Caroline as possible. The man seems stunned but agrees. When the man goes to care for Caroline, the maid quietly whispers that Zex speaks exactly like an adult, although he is only 1 year old. This frightens her. She suspects he might be possessed or cursed, and Zex, left alone, can only watch. He was pushed into the bed that had already been moved, and he lies there, pondering the mistake. Perhaps stopping behaving like a child was a bad idea. The fever was increasing. His head and whole body throbbed with pain. He vaguely recalled that the last time he was so seriously ill was as a child in a previous life. The memory becomes clearer. When he had a fever back then, his sister Nanami was always nearby. Lost in delirium, he hears desperate crying in the darkness, calls his sister Nanami's name, and wonders who is sobbing so sadly. He reaches out in his feverish haze. His past self promises his younger sister that her older brother will stay close, begging her to stop crying. The dream fades. He stirs in bed, and in his fevered mind, a quiet, distant scream reaches him. He remembers that he was moved to this room because they feared the disease was contagious and wanted to keep him away from Caroline. The sound grows louder, and he understands it's her. On the other side of the room, Caroline stands in her crib, tears rolling down her face. She desperately calls, "In the eye, in the eye." His eyes widen in disbelief. The sound cuts through the fog of illness. As if struck by electricity, he understands. She's calling him her brother. For the first time, Caroline calls him that, and this unexpected tenderness pierces him to the very heart, all the more painfully because he thought he cared for her only out of necessity. Panic grips him as he sees her trying to get out of the crib. "No," he shouts, making the trembling body move. He throws his legs over the edge of the bed, but his strength fails and he falls heavily to the floor. She finally reaches him, and he holds her tightly in desperate embraces, whispering her name, flooded with relief that she is safe. But the effort is too great. His consciousness fades and he collapses. He lies motionless on the cold floor. Caroline, with her head tilted, looks at him and quietly calls him again. After a moment of confused silence, she gently begins to pat his back, a simple child's attempt to comfort. When her brother did not respond, she decided to stay close, snuggled up to his back, and quickly fell asleep next to him on the floor. She slept soundly on the floor, curled up next to her brother, and the sun's rays poured through the window and illuminated the quiet room where the two children lay. He suddenly woke up sharply, his mind cleared. Touching his forehead, he was surprised to feel that the fever was completely gone and his body was lively again. He wondered if he had lost consciousness, and suddenly panic gripped him as he looked for Caroline. She was peacefully sleeping nearby. He watched as she stirred, and a quiet sound escaped her lips. He gently greeted her. "Good morning, Caroline." For a moment he thought she might stay close out of care, but he dismissed the thought, reminding himself that she was only 8 months old. Her eyes slowly opened. A bright, joyful smile blossomed on her face. She shouted, "Me too, me too." And Zach stared in shock. He decided not to let anyone else into his world, but he could not deny what he heard. His hands clutched the fabric of the nightshirt. Then he realized he would not be able to prevent this bond from forming. She was his sister. Oh. Overwhelmed with emotions, he held her tightly in his arms. Accepting the new reality, he said to her, "Yes, Caroline, I am your older brother, and you are my dear sister." After some time, they found themselves in the family library, a little older now. Zex, in formal attire, glanced over the shelves and asked his sister what she wanted to read today. and Caroline murmured thoughtfully, gazing into the endless collection of books. She enthusiastically pulled a large, luxuriously decorated volume from the lower shelf. Me too, me too. This, she exclaimed, handing him a book titled The Legend of the Holy Empire. Zex agreed and told her to sit so he could read it. He began reading the story aloud. It was about the time when the Demon King appeared at the last frontier. When it seemed all was lost, a voice sounded, "They will not lose." It was the voice of the hero Shion, who stood beside the holy Kazara when. As he read, Caroline looked up at him and called his name. He stopped and asked what was wrong, but she only replied that nothing was, and he sighed inwardly, thinking it was just an ordinary fairy tale for a picture book. He continued reading the names from the tale. Hero Shion, Saint Discazara and his sister, repeated them with a questioning intonation. These names brought him a terrible revelation. This world was the same as in the game from his past life. He looked at his sister and truly saw her for the first time, Caroline Flameral U. Isera Fornata. With her golden hair and bright red eyes, she was definitely a character from that game. Shock threw his thoughts back to his previous life. He sat hunched before a glowing screen, having just lost, burning with rage over defeat by a weak opponent, and feeling that yet another version of himself had collapsed. He agonized over strategy, recalling his theory. If the captured target was near Caroline, there were more survival paths and the chances of success were highest, but now he understood and it was a mistake. His concentration was broken by his sister Nanami, who appeared in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. She asked why he was still awake, and he muttered that he just wanted to drink. Then she looked at the screen and aloud wondered if there was even a single route left. She noticed how long he had been sitting at the game, asked if he really liked it that much, then told him to stop staring and go to sleep. He quietly agreed, and as she left, wished her good night. Alone again, his thoughts returned to the true goal, all because of what Nanami said. He played this game for only one reason, a selfish desire to find a way for her to stay close. But there was never a path in the game that could save Caroline, and in his own life that hope also faded. Death took his sister. The burden of that defeat fell on him again. He gasped, a wave of nausea surged. Not again, he could not endure it a second time. He looked at the innocent girl before him, and the terrible truth became clear in his mind. She, his dear sister, was the one destined to die. She was the villain. When he was struck by the revelation, Caroline, completely unsuspecting, leaned over and gently kissed his hand. She, in her innocent tenderness, leans over and kisses her brother on the cheek, completely unaware of the storm of despair raging within him. The weight of his knowledge becomes unbearable, and tears roll down his face. Seeing his suffering, Karen gently strokes his head, trying to soothe him with a lullaby so the pain would recede. Her name echoes in his mind, a painful reminder of the future he must stop. He fiercely wipes away his tears, unwilling to accept such a tragic turn, and suddenly realizes the main storyline of the game hasn't even started yet, so he has time and choice. Karen's voice pulls him from his thoughts, asking if he is upset again, and he quickly reassures her, promising he will manage. Her innocent trust shines as she says she will always be fine as long as he is near. Overwhelmed with emotion, he holds her tightly and silently, resolutely vows to protect her. His determination turned into an unshakable oath, a cry of resistance against the sinister bony specter of fate looming over his sister. He will change Karen's destiny. The young boy Zek sits with crossed arms, thoughtfully considering his new reality. In his past life, he was reincarnated into a game that combines dating and action, the tale of the brave saint. And in this world, he is just a background character, the older brother of a girl named Caroline. Nearby is the same Caroline, a little girl happily occupied with her colored pencils and paper. The story was divided into 3 parts. The first and largest took place at the academy. The player's gender choice determined the role. If male, they became the hero; if female, the saint. The second was an adventure to reseal the demon lord, and the third focused on personal romances with various characters met during the academy. Pay attention specifically to Caroline. She appeared in the game only when the female heroine, the saint, was chosen. In that story, Caroline was the worst possible rival. Selfish, arrogant, and from the very first meeting full of envy, the complete opposite of the pure and innocent saint. She remembers how jealousy flared within her every time more people were drawn to the saint, even the main suitors. This envy pushed Caroline to bully the saint, but ironically, it only elevated the saint in the eyes of others. Path of the Star ended gloomily. Unable to endure any longer, Carolina finally joined the demons to kill the saint, and for this last crime, she was destined to perish. A cheerful voice tears the edge of memories. His younger sister, Karen, calls to her lap and proudly shows a piece of paper, all covered in energetic scribbles. Karen looks at her creation and excitedly says that it is incredible and truly wonderful. Shining with happiness, she closes her eyes and silently asks to be petted on the head, and he responds, gently placing his hand on her hair and thanking her. Her joy is contagious. She sits right in the middle of the papers and crayons and enthusiastically promises to draw more for her lap and eye. Seeing her pure, innocent joy, a determination arises in his heart. He must do something to save her from inevitable doom. He stands alone by the window, gazing into the distance, and a plan begins to form in his mind. If he simply refuses to follow the game's plot, he can change the outcome. If he raises Karen properly, she will not grow so arrogant, will not become the saint's enemy, and will not succumb to the demon's temptations. His face hardens, a new, steely determination lights up in his eyes. From the end of the hall, two maids watch him, whispering to each other, surprised at how seriously this boy behaves. On the front stairs, he was absorbed in thoughts about paternal love, while nearby, out of his attention, two maids whispered, revealing the true reason for the future villainous Carolina. The parents give her neither love nor warmth, and all the servants treat her with icy indifference. The weight of this knowledge presses on him. He understands. He somehow has to make their parents love Karen, a task that seems impossible to him. He recalls that he saw them only once, when they first left her here in doubt. She even remembers them. Resolutely determined, he approaches the butler and demands to be informed the next time the master and mistress come. The butler calmly agrees. 3 whole months passed, and his irritation burst out when he looked at the estate. The thought that the parents would leave the children in a completely different mansion drove him to boiling point. While he burned with rage, Karen tugged his sleeve. She urgently needed the toilet. Without hesitation, he picked her up in his arms and rushed through the corridors. She clung to him, her face twisted with discomfort, and she whimpered that it would be soon. He managed to reach the door just in time. While standing, a voice rises from the hallway announcing the arrival of the master and mistress. His eyes widen in shock. He instantly rushes to the railing above the vestibule. Below stand father and mother, surrounded by servants. "Father, mother," he exclaims, his voice full of desperate hope. And the parents do not even raise their eyes. Instead, the butler sharply sharpens his voice, calls Cyril by name Zex, and orders him to get down from there immediately. He looks, not believing his eyes, and realizes that they are completely ignoring him. His father simply orders the butler to serve tea, and they turn to leave. Karen, now nearby, asks what happened, and he hastily explains that their parents simply did not notice them, but this excuse sounds hollow. Later, he sits next to Karen, takes a set of plush bunnies, and explains to her what she never really knew, showing in turn the father bunny, the mother bunny, and their little bunny, gently showing how the mother lovingly hugs her child. He hugs the plush family tightly, gently explaining that father and mother are people who love you, hug you, and are always there to protect you. He sits on the floor next to Karen and continues the lesson about family, asks if she understands everything, and she cheerfully replies yes. Her understanding was obvious. She raised 2 plush toys and joyfully named them Neon Eye Mother and Neon Eye Father, and he, pleased with her progress, says he will go to the bathroom for a moment. Walking down the corridor, he froze. From behind the large door, voices were heard talking about territorial matters, and what he heard hardened his resolve. He must find a way for their parents to finally truly see Karen. Behind that door, the father dismissed the very idea of communicating with the children, saying it was a hassle he did not want to deal with. The mother wondered why they even left their rooms. The father disinterestedly ordered the butler Suze to sort it out, confident that Hill would handle it brilliantly. She expressed her disgust in detail, grumbling that children are annoying, constantly screaming, and she does not want them to dirty her clothes with their saliva. She admits that Cyril or Zex wanted to see them, but says she simply orders him to ignore us. He froze in the corridor. He hears the mother's last contemptuous words echoing from the room, "Just feed them some story and deal with it yourself." The coldness of her refusal washed over him. He returns to Karen's room with a heavy heart, and she is still happily playing, exclaiming, "Nyan I motherfather." Seeing him, she joyfully asks for a book, and he gently corrects her, reminding her that he is only her brother Nyan I. He agrees, and they sit together, open the book. While they read, he reflects on his role. Perhaps he is only her older brother. But he resolutely decides to do everything to love her just like any ordinary father, and this is evident in their daily life. They sleep quietly together. He helps her get dressed every morning, and they eat side by side at the table. Their bond grows stronger every day, and when Karen strolls through the garden, her eyes light up because she noticed a shining butterfly. How beautiful! She exclaimed and asked what it was, and he explained that it was a magical light butterfly that comes to the garden because the gardener takes such careful care of the flowers. She froze with wide-open eyes, full of curiosity, while her brother Kyrillo points to the estate gardener who is tending the flowers. The gardener, surprised by their appearance, looks up at the young master. Karen smiles sincerely and brightly, thanks the gardener, whose heart is clearly touched by her kindness. Cyril looks at them and feels a wave of relief. He believes that with such love in her heart, she is definitely not doomed to die, and for now she is simply a kind and sincere child. His moment of peace is shattered. A grim vision from the game flashes in his mind, Karen lifeless and bloodied. He cannot relax. She is only 2 years old, and he knows that her nature can still change sharply, and the eerie similarity of this world to the game convinces him that it could force her to go down the same tragic path. His gloomy thoughts are interrupted by Karen's cheerful call. She calls Nia and me and stands among the flowers. Surrounded by butterflies, she calls her friends. Seeing her innocent joy, his determination hardens into a quiet promise. He will do everything to protect his dear little sister. He extends a finger. A butterfly has settled on it, and she asks, "Do you like them too?" She admires the delicate creature, and suddenly Kyrillo realizes what he must do to change the future. He needs to become stronger. Later, in the silence of his room, Kyrillo sits up in bed, his face hardening with determination. A plan is already forming in his mind. At dawn, he secretly begins training, running and doing exercises, counting every stretch. He remembered hearing that it is not good for children to build muscles, but he shrugged it off. He decided to train in a way that suits his young body, and most importantly, to learn to fight. After physical exercises in search of strength, he heads to another part of the estate and cautiously peeks into the noisy kitchen where cooks and servants are working hard. He watches as the cook, a man with bright red hair and eyes, shouts "Fireball," and sets the oven on fire. The spectacle confirms his suspicions. Magic exists here, like in the game, and magical properties are reflected in appearance. So understanding this, he decides to learn magic. But at that moment, the cook notices him and asks what the young master is doing in his kitchen. Startled, he shyly asks for some water. The chef passes the simple request to another kitchen worker, who nods, and Kyrillo stands there, a small, uncertain figure in a large, bustling room. He quietly watches the kitchen from afar. The chef sighs, saying how unfortunate it is that some noble is colorless, while the maid effortlessly conjures a water bubble in the air. Cyril understands the essence in this world. Everyone is born with mana, and an attribute that allows them to embody it in magic, and his white hair reveals the absence of an attribute, so he is one of the few who cannot do this, whereas the maid's blue hair and eyes indicate that she possesses water magic. The maid, handing the book to the cook, did not stop talking and said that spells are essentially colorless. They agreed that it is bad for a house to have a colorless atmosphere, and were confident that the young lady Karen with light hair would definitely inherit the family's light magic. The maid smiles to herself. If Karen masters light magic like a saint, the master and mistress will be delighted. She wonders why the parents treat Karen so coldly, since she is so important for the future of this family. He overheard more gossip from the servants hiding around the corner. They dismissed him as the colorless brother, said that Karen has recently become popular, but he was less fortunate, and they were already rejoicing at the thought that they could boast about having served Karen if she masters light magic. As he walked away, Cyril realized the bitter truth. This is exactly how the world sees the colorless, as failures from birth. Later he finds Karen, who is restlessly moving in her sleep in bed, and mentally tells himself that the absence of some trait does not make her useless. She stirred, her eyes filled with tears. He gently advises her to rest a little, and she obediently agrees. Tenderly covering her with a blanket, he quietly closes the door to her room, leaving her to rest. He trains again in the forest. Out of breath, he focuses on his goal to master physical enhancement, a technique that strengthens the body by channeling mana through it. He knows that for now this is the right path. Physical enhancement suits everyone, even those without an attribute. He remembers this from the game, but the innate magic of the attribute list has not yet manifested, so he cannot yet use ordinary magic. He gathers his strength and tries to direct his mana. The attempt backfired. He howled as a dark, viscous substance burst from his hand and splattered his forearm. With a twisted face, he realized that even the smallest mistake results in such consequences. They say anyone can master this technique, but the risks are very serious. He looks at his hand. Thick, dark liquid is dripping from it. Probably, when he was enhancing the protection around his head, he made a mistake and got a grotesque recoil. This is a technique that no normal person would ever use. Despite the injury, he tightly clenches his fist. This is his only choice. He believes that only this way can he protect Karen. Gathering her resolve, Karen rushed into the large, luxuriously decorated bedroom and sat on the bed. Looking around the empty room, she called her brother, not understanding where he could be. Her search leads her to the door, where she finally finds him. With a cry of relief, she throws herself forward and tightly wraps her arms around him. He looks surprised and apologizes for waking her. The relief on her face quickly fades when she notices his injured hand. "Me and you, your hand," she says, her voice filled with anxiety. He tries to brush it off, saying it's nothing and that he was just practicing magic. What she sees frightens her too much. Tears flow down her face. She lets out a frightened scream, and he quickly apologizes for scaring her, wrapping his hand with a piece of cloth, hiding the terrible wound from her. Seeing how scared she is, he realizes he must be more careful. He decides to do everything so that Karen does not find him when he trains in magic again. To calm her, he asks if she wants him to read her a book. The offer worked. Soon they're sitting side by side. he opens a large fairy tale book and reads a story about a forest elder who asked for 3 things to grant a wish. While he reads, his thoughts drift away. How can that main character be so effective? He was sure it was because that one was a reincarnate with some special knowledge, but he himself is a reincarnatizo. Why such a difference in their knowledge? His pause embarrassed Karen, and she called his name. Her voice pulls him out of his thoughts. She raises her eyes to his face in the shadow and calls his name again. Suddenly, a realization begins to form in his mind. In that case, he. Karen's voice calling his name sharply pulled him from his thoughts. She apologized for interrupting and asked where they had stopped in the story. Since then, he began practicing magic and hiding his secret from Karen's eyes, leaving her to wake up alone in the big bed. He immersed himself in study, and she could only watch from afar. Even when they read together, everything felt different. A new tension hung in the air. Separation weighed on them both. He often woke up restless at night, and she sat awake in her bed, tightly clutching a comfort toy. Finally, unable to endure any longer, Karen gets out of bed and combs through the empty corridors, even looks outside and calls for her brother, but he is nowhere to be found. The search leads her outside, where she encounters the estate gardener. He greets her politely, but she barely pays attention. She is still looking for her brother. The gardener says worriedly that she shouldn't wander alone and offers to escort her home. When Karen asks again about her brother, the man replies that he hasn't seen Zex. Finding no clues, she returns to her room and, sitting alone on the carpet, feels a deep loneliness wash over her. Meanwhile, in the forest behind the estate, Cyril is fully immersed in training, focusing his mana. He strengthens his body and crushes a piece of wood with his bare hand. He examines his progress and realizes, with mana control, he can now double his strength. He considers going further, perhaps even enough to shatter a stone, but as he prepares to continue, he freezes. Karen is standing just a few steps away, and he calls her name, filled with anxiety. He returns to Karen, his face full of worry, asks when she arrived and how long she has been watching. Her answer is a single quiet word: hatred. Her head is still bowed, and she repeats the word, adding another magic. She hates magic. When she raised her gaze, her face was tear-streaked. She spoke again in a trembling voice, and her suffering suddenly pierced Cyril with sharp pity. With a desperate cry, she clearly expresses her fear. She wants her brother to stay close. The weight of his actions falls upon him, and he scolds himself, realizing that in trying to protect her, he only caused her pain. He convinced himself that the secret training was for her sake, but it turned out the opposite. A thing he wanted to avoid became Karen's tears. He falls to his knees and tightly embraces her, sincerely apologizing, saying it may sound like an excuse, but assures her that he loves her above all else, and that will never change. She wipes away a tear and asks if he really means it, and he promises that he does. His words wash away her fears, and a radiant, relieved smile blooms on her face. In a few moments, they walk to the estate, holding hands. Karen calls him. She wants to talk more. He asks if she is sure about this, reminding her that magic can be scary and can hurt him. She stands firm and answers confidently that she is sure because she will be by his side. She resolutely objected, puffing her cheeks and saying that she hates the very thought of him getting hurt. Cyril finally understood. Her tears were not from fear of magic, but from anxiety for his safety, and when he asked again about magic, she declared that she would love it if it meant he would stay with her. Touched by her words, he decided to teach her, and she gladly agreed, calling him Nai Sensei. He begins her training with the basics of orb magic, explaining that her attribute is fire. Karen, her face like a mask of concentration, agrees to the lesson. Her blonde hair and red eyes reveal that she has 2 attributes: light and fire. He recalled all the tricks of light magic from the memory of his past life. It is a rare power, and one talent is not enough to master it. There was a vague rumor that the real condition must be deep compassion for another person, and this uncertainty irritated him terribly. In the original story, despite her potential, Karen never managed to use her light magic, the power of the saint. He gently strokes her head and praises her efforts, and Karen shines and giggles joyfully. Suddenly, he has a thought. If compassion is really the key, then Karen in her current state should have no problem using light magic. This realization sows new anxiety. If she masters light magic, she could become a target of the royal family and other powerful forces, and he firmly decided not to put her in danger, but his thoughts are interrupted when Karen proudly shows 2 small balls of fire she just summoned, and looking at her, he begins to doubt whether he can protect her when she becomes stronger. Years passed, although the future remained uncertain. He and Karen gradually grew, and learning and training together, he began to feel a ray of hope. Then a new figure entered their lives, a maid with a reserved, unreadable face, who greeted politely. She solemnly introduces herself as Shion Villacroma and declares that she will be their guardian. While Karen says this to him, Cyril's mind pierces the polite words with an icy insight. This woman is a spy. In the grand hall with high ceilings, a woman with long dark hair informed Shion that she received her first task: It came personally from the Holy Royal family, and handing over a glowing paper, the woman ordered Shion to show her loyalty, insisting that serving them is a great honor. Having received a new task, Shion stands before Cyril and Karen. When Karen hugs her brother, Shion introduces herself and says that from now on she will take care of them, and Cyril politely greets her in response. She glances around, feeling that the room is a bit warm. With a smooth motion, she slides the window open, and on her face is a calm, professional expression. At that moment, her foot caught and she lunged forward, loudly plopping onto the floor. Lying there, she froze, and irritation flashed across her face. Coming to her senses, she closes the nursery door. A small scratch is visible on her cheek, and she calmly says she will wait in the corridor if they need anything. The door clicked. Cyril pressed his sister to himself, and his goal became clear in his mind. His target is Caroline Flammerl Ui, Seri Fornata. He understands that his mission is to watch over her. She has the potential to wield light magic, and he must immediately report to the palace as soon as he notices the slightest sign. Unsuspecting, Karen stands calmly, surrounded by a barely noticeable ethereal glow. In the outer corridor, Shion patiently stands by the door. With a thoughtful expression, she is on guard. Soon the door opened and Cyril appeared with Karen, explaining to Shion that his sister needs to use the bathroom. Shion bows, agreeing, and when Cyril says she does not need to go with them, she stubbornly insists it is her job. Walking, she suggests the idea to Karen that she address Cyril as Oniai Isima. Instead, Karen turns to her brother with a bright smile, exclaims Nai and I, and asks him to look at her. She looks up at her brother, blushing slightly when he asks her to call him Oni Isawa. Meanwhile, Cyril decides that it is time to begin her serious training so that she becomes a true lady. She giggles and warmly hugs him. Shion watches this tender scene from the side and marvels for noble brothers and sisters. Such closeness is unusual, but she is comfortable with it. This way she can simultaneously watch over both children. Later, standing among the trees, Cyril extends his hand. Quietly whispering a concealment spell, he summons a small glowing familiar and releases it. It lightly flaps its wings and rises to observe Shion from afar. He returns inside, crosses his arms, and thoughtfully looks out the window when suddenly Shane's voice interrupts his thoughts. The afternoon tea with rose cookies is already ready. While they were sitting for tea, another maid with noticeable animal ears nervously poured a cup for Karen and spilled the tea, and Karen, unflustered, calmly asked if the flowers were from the estate's garden, and Shion, always a professional, quietly corrected the maid's grammar. Cyril asked Shion to allow him to pour the tea himself, but she categorically refused, saying it was her duty. She poured herself a cup and deliberately spilled it just like the other maid, and Cyril, observing, mentally decided, "After this, I must definitely talk to the cook." After her feigned clumsiness, she places a perfectly brewed cup of tea before Cyril without spilling a drop. Later, she wheels a cart with clean dishes into the kitchen, determined to make the staff accept her as Lady Caroline's new servant. The gardener, seeing her work, asks if she washed these things herself, and upon receiving an affirmative answer, smiles and expresses approval. In the kitchen, they approached and began interrogating Shane. The air here is colorless. The family is doomed. Who would voluntarily come to work here if not a weirdo? Shane calmly replied that she was hired on recommendation and that she was simply a servant. However, in her soul, she quietly reflects on the real reason for her being here. The younger sister with golden hair and the gift of light, a small ray of hope for the family's future. She diligently stands by the sink washing dishes, while two others in the kitchen started talking nearby. The younger one noted how naively attached Karen is to her brother despite his paleness, and emphasized her kindness to the servants. The elder agreed and excitedly added that she would be pleased to watch the young lady grow up. While she continues scrubbing plates, Shion relays a message from Karen, asked if the rose jam was made from roses from the garden. The kitchen maids are delighted by the young lady's curiosity. One suggests winning her favor, maybe next time serving candied roses, saying she could become the next saint, while another warns not to overdo it because the young master would not approve. Without their chatter, Shion remains impenetrable. Having washed the last dishes, she stands by the sink. Next to her on the floor a pile of broken plates. People came from the kitchen offering to clear the rest of the dishes, and she simply admits that Shion handled her task. Then a gentle knock on the door, and a voice from the corridor sounded, "Dinner is ready." At the dining table, Karen excitedly calls her brother. Shion jumps up to help the young lady with a napkin, but Cyril intervenes and tells the servant to let him do it. Karen firmly refuses. "I'll manage myself," so Shion offers to help her with the food. She proudly repeats her statement, insisting that she can eat by herself. Cyril smiles and praises her how amazing she is. Karen beams and cheerfully says, "Aha," while Shion quietly corrects her to the more formal yes. Her expression is inscrutable. Later that evening, Shion enters Karen's room holding a nightgown and tells the girl rushing to bed that it's time to change. Before she could help, Cyril appeared and Karen clung to him. He told Cheyenne that he would dress his sister himself, and when the maid protested that it was her job, he smiled and insisted, explaining that he liked taking care of Karen. Cheyenne hesitantly agreed. Freed from night duties, she said goodbye to Zex and Caroline and quietly closed the door behind her. Her face became serious as she descended the stairs. Passing the servants' quarters, she's stopped by another maid who loudly asks how long this time the new girl assigned to the young master will last. She froze by the door, hand on the handle, listening to the voices inside. They were talking about the first maid, about the terrible circumstances of her departure, and someone said that she considered the colorless subhumans and couldn't stand it, so she quickly quit. In the room, two other maids sat on the beds gossiping. One said the young master was terrifying, spoke like an adult at 1 year old, and started yelling at the servants, causing another maid to quit immediately. The other loudly asked if he was possessed, and decided it was better to stay away from young Lage. Shion entered the room and they flinched. She calmly asked if they had finished for today, and one of the maids turned around and angrily complained that the master and mistress did not care about the children, and all their efforts were in vain. Whenever someone tried to speak to the young lady, the young master immediately stopped them. She passed by them without a word. As she walked, one of the maids muttered sarcastically again about how easy it was to be responsible for the young master. Cheyenne could just relax because he would take care of everything himself, and another agreed, saying it was unfair to the maids who were already overwhelmed with work. Laughter did not subside. One of the comrades advised Cheyenne to approach and help. Another added that, supposedly, the young gentleman was colorless, and his future depended on how well he could color himself along with the young lady, so it was a futile matter. Cheyenne fell silent for a moment, then turned around, said a simple good night in farewell, and left, leaving the two gossipers to stew in their indignation. Later, alone in the room, she began to undress. Her thoughts returned to the first meeting with the young master. She realized he was not trying to ingratiate himself with the sister. His eyes were calm and focused, carefully studying her whether she would be useful to him and his sister. How. When she pulled the ribbons from her hair, her face became serious. These two, they were completely focused. Sitting on the edge of the bed in a nightgown, she gathered her resolve. She could not allow personal feelings to mix with work. Her mission was clear. She only had to persuade Zex to let her stay close to Lady Carolina. Suddenly, a painful memory surfaced. A small, shadowy figure running, chased by cruel words echoing in the darkness. Disgusting child, you parasite, no one wants you. The memory sharpened to a moment of pure horror. Her younger self, face twisted with fear, shouted at an invisible figure, "Why are you here? Don't come near me. You are filth, somewhere." Her father's voice rang in her memory, explaining the story of their family, how once they lost a political conflict and were exiled from the country, but the royal family extended a hand in their hour of need and allowed them to prosper. But this help came at a terrible cost. He loomed over her and demanded she give everything: eyes, ears, body, hair, and even soul to the royal family, saying that if she was good for nothing else, she could at least become a sacrificial pawn. This thought scared her to the bone, but inside trembled a tiny desperate glimmer of hope. She wondered if, dying for the family, for him, she would finally earn her father's acceptance. The memory dissolved, returning Cheyenne to the present. She was standing in the nursery. Cyril, seeing her, said not to worry about them, and Cheyenne replied that it was her job and quite logical that she was working the hours she was paid for. She turned her attention to the young lady and announced that it was time to change clothes, but Karen stubbornly clung to her brother, refusing and insisting that Nye and I do it. Cheyenne calmly explained that the ability to delegate properly is part of a lady's duty, and asked if Karen really wanted her brother to behave like a servant. He gently pressed his sister to himself, and with a smile said he was looking forward to the day she would become a real lady. He promised that she would always be his little sister, the pride and joy of his life. His words touched her deeply, and Karen, filled with new determination, clenched her small fists and said she would do her best, and from the side Cheyenne noticed this and was glad that she would work diligently. And she really tried. Under Cheyenne's watchful eye, Karen learned good table manners, how to make a curtsy, and how to carry herself with grace, gradually turning into a true lady. Her confidence grew with each day. One afternoon in the garden, she jokingly challenged her brother to a race to the gazebo and dashed off with a joyful scream. Watching her run, Cyril turned to Cheyenne with a grateful look, thanked her for everything, and admitted that her appearance was timely, because before Cheyenne's arrival, he would have had to keep his distance from Karen even though she was his sister, and now he could rely on Cheyenne because he didn't understand girls at all. He and his sister Karen were preparing for a race across the lawn, and Karen insisted that they start simultaneously to be fair, while Cheyenne, standing behind the estate gates, quietly wondered if she had finally managed to earn his full trust. But this thought triggered an unwanted memory. Their father's harsh voice echoed again in her head, calling her useless and annoying. Despite the painful memory, a gentle, bittersweet smile appeared on her lips, and the feeling of trust warmed her from within. Soon, when winter settled on the estate, Karen's joyful voice rang out in the fresh air. She excitedly pointed to a patch of snow where several white bunnies were hopping, and called her brother to look at how cute they were. Suddenly, one of the rabbits became hostile and took a threatening stance. Shane instantly became a shield in front of Karen, pushing her back, but the girl was not afraid. She knelt down, stretched out her hand, and quietly spoke to the animal, assuring it that it was not scary. The gentle approach worked. Karen tenderly hugged the now submissive rabbit, admiring its fluffiness and noting that its red eyes were just like her own. Cyril smiled and agreed that they were as beautiful as hers. Nearby, Cheyenne watched this tender moment, her face expressionless. Later that night, she wrote her usual report. The object's magic had not changed, but her thoughts kept returning to the rabbit that was hostile until Karen's light magic affected it. She almost mentioned it, but ultimately decided not to write. It seemed too unconfirmed. Days flew by, spring arrived. While Karen was counting tulips in the garden, Cyril was preparing to give his sister another lesson and asked if she remembered what he taught her yesterday. She confidently answered yes. He began to explain his theory about magic. Although it is usually said that it is a matter of intuition, he believed that without understanding the basic principles one cannot properly create spells. While Karen listened attentively, Shane observed the lesson from the nearby door. Watching him, she pondered. Zexama, being colorless, could not possess magic himself, but he taught his sister so passionately there was only one conclusion: he must love Lady Carolina very much. Shyly watching her brother and sister, a thought crossed her mind. Probably the boy is jealous of his incredibly talented sister. Her thoughts were interrupted by the image of young Karen. The girl, tense and incredibly focused, stretched out her tiny hands in front of her. Then a quiet pop, and between her palms appeared a ball of light particles, shining brightly. Heron turned to her brother, shining with pride, but from behind the column, Cheyenne instantly recognized the spell. It was a light sphere, a type of light magic. She knew she had to say something immediately. As soon as she did, Caroline would be taken to the royal palace, and the brother and sister would be forced to live apart. Later during dinner, Cyril directly addressed the maid and asked to speak alone after Karen fell asleep. Making sure the girl was sound asleep in bed, Cheyenne prepared to meet the young master. He led her outside into the silence of the estate, and as they walked, Cheyenne felt a strange, disturbing sensation from him and wondered what this meeting was really about. He stopped, turned to her with a serious expression, and asked a direct question that sent a chill down her spine. "Cheyenne, you are a spy from the palace, aren't you?" The accusation threw her off balance. She began to stammer, her hands flew to her face, her body trembled uncontrollably. Cyril took this as confirmation and offered a deal: he would keep her secret if she remained silent about Karen's magic, adding a question whether she had already reported it. Embarrassed, Cheyenne insisted she could not do that because she had sworn allegiance to the royal family. With a sharp gesture, Cyril broke her magical cover and revealed long, pointed ears. Cheyenne gasped in shock, recognizing her as an elf, then issued an ultimatum. If she refused, he would expose her, reminding her of the public's hatred of elves, and aloud wondering how the royal family would react when they found out that one of their supposed enemies had infiltrated their ranks as a spy. He continued to threaten, his face cold. He did not care about the nation. The only thing that worried him was Karen's safety. Then he turned the situation against Cheyenne, coldly reminding her that it was she, the one who swore allegiance to the royal family, who would destroy them, not him. He solemnly stated his offer, and she, broken and shy, bowed her head in submission and agreed to his terms as if it was meant to be. Having obtained her consent, he gave the order. She was not to say a word about the forknot of siblings without his explicit permission. He promised to keep her secret as long as she honored their contract, and as he spoke, he made a gesture. Cheyenne suddenly felt as if something invisible was wrapping around her. Cyril confirmed that the pact was sealed, and he would keep his word. Her eyes widened in disbelief due to a strange feeling. She could not comprehend how everything had suddenly and completely gotten out of control. She doubted her fear. As a professional spy, she should not have faltered, but the memory of his simple, hidden command echoed in her head with a force she could not explain. Standing alone under the trees, her thoughts raced. The boy used spells she had never even heard of, and there was an icy coldness in his eyes. She was left with only one troubling question: who was he, or what was he really? In the sunny garden, Cyril announces that it is time for magical practice, turns to his sister Karen, and asks her to try using light magic for him. Karen looks up at him hesitantly, and their maid shyly watches silently. She apologizes and says that she does not yet know how to use light magic, but vows to learn someday because she knows it heals and cleanses. Cyril agrees, returns to Cheyenne, informs the maid that he told Karen everything, orders to report any incidents and not to tell outsiders about light magic, while Karen watches in surprise as her brother and Cheyenne find understanding. Surprise quickly turned to anxiety. Karen approached Cheyenne, Her voice trembling with emotion, she reminded that Cyril said light magic was their secret and repeated his warning. If others find out, bad people will come and take her far from him, while Cheyenne's face remained cold and expressionless. Sensing her fear or anxiety, he gently asks, "Have I ever been wrong, Karen?" Then explains that he decided it was okay to tell Cheyenne. Karen, looking at the ground, quietly agrees and says it is all right. Shyly she spoke, her gaze was firm. She declared that she had sworn not to betray Zexum. Cyril asked if it was painful for her to hear this secret, and with a confident smile simply said, "I know." Finally, it was time to tell Cheyenne his own secrets. He asks her what she was told about those without an attribute, these colorless ones, wants to know if she heard that they are considered worthless due to the lack of their own magic. Karen gasped in shock. He gently asks Karen to calm down, explaining that what Cheyenne believes is just the common opinion about him, but this hardly comforts her. She is confused and angry, asks how Cheyenne could say such a thing to her brother. She again says that Cheyenne was only voicing public opinion and asks Karen not to be angry. Biting her lip, Karen reluctantly agrees, but in her gaze it is clear that the memory that this had already happened still troubles her. He begins to talk about his unique magic. If ordinary mages use mana to create magic that requires sacrifice, like fire, then he uses magic without sacrifice mana in its pure, unchanged form. Cheyenne is stunned and says she has never heard of such a thing, and Cyril replies that if it doesn't exist, he will simply invent it, to which Cheyenne insists that it should be impossible because they say that colorless ones have no mana. To prove his point, he takes Cheyenne by the hands and casts a spell with the simple name. Joy warmth spreads through her. Cheyenne shyly lowers her gaze. Her heart begins to pound. Cyril watches her reaction and asks, "So she?" She stood embarrassed while Cyril explained the nature of his spell. He admitted that he had previously calmed her with mental magic when she was restless, and said that the spell he just cast is a type of mind manipulation he invented himself. His mana cannot leave the body like ordinary magic. Instead, it must be sent directly to the target, like a satellite signal, and he warned that depending on its use, this magic can be very dangerous because most people do not see it. He turned to her with a smile and asked if she would keep his secret. He added that besides mind manipulation, there are other forms of magic without attributes, but they would talk about that later. Emotions overwhelmed her, her face flushed, and she quietly agreed to keep his secret. The moment was interrupted by Karen's sudden piercing scream. With tears in her eyes, she loudly protested that only she should feel happiness while holding her brother's hand. When Karen clung tightly to her brother's hand, Cyril gently pulled his hand away from Cheyenne. Karen, still sulking, thought to herself what that servant had done to deserve so much brotherly trust, and Cheyenne, watching everything, simply said she didn't care. Time passed and Cyril was about to turn 5 years old. He spent his days immersed in books, learning more and more about the world he now lived in. He decided it was time to see how ordinary people of this world lived, so he set out to the local church and adventurers guild to gather information. Raising his eyes from the book, he asked Cheyenne if Karen had returned, and the servant replied that her lecture would last some time longer. Cyril pondered the next step. He wanted to go out, but knew that as soon as he told Karen, she would insist on going with him and might get into danger, so he turned back to Cheyenne, a plan forming in his mind. "Listen," he began. Meanwhile, Karen, having just finished her lessons, wandered the empty corridors of the manor, calling for her brother. The calls led her outside, where she saw Cyril sitting on the stairs and Cheyenne standing guard. When Karen approached, Cheyenne turned and asked her what was the matter. But Cyril was no longer there. He stood in the middle of a noisy city street, surrounded by ordinary people, staring at the unfamiliar buildings of the world beyond the walls of his manor. He wandered through the common town, and the main street seemed to him just so nothing special. The alleys appeared dangerous, and he hesitated to enter expensive shops because he knew he wouldn't be able to prepare what could be bought there. Stopping by a fruit stall, he admired the bright goods, but suddenly realized he had no idea about their price and remembered to ask Cheyenne about the current market prices. He noticed how children freely played in the square, and their parents were not nearby. This led him to think that the place must be safe enough to leave them alone. His thoughts turned to practical matters. He wanted to buy some local food during the next visit, but the question of money arose. Asking the butler would be too suspicious. For a moment, he wondered if his worthless father really worked, but quickly dismissed the thought and attributed the family's well-being solely to the skill of their excellent butler Sui's. Meanwhile, in the estate, Karen rushed to Cheyenne in the garden, calling her. The maid turned around and calmly asked what was the matter. She stopped in front of the maid, her face stern and demanding, and her cheeks burned with irritation. She directly asked Cheyenne where her brother was. In response to her question, Cyril's double appeared sitting casually and smiling, waved his hand and said he was right here, but Karen was not fooled. She pointed accusingly and shouted that he was not her only isoma. She enthusiastically explained that her real brother in glitter was much cooler, Every time she looked at him, her cheeks blushed and a warm, pleasant tremor spread in her heart. She decisively said that the double did not look like him at all and could not deceive her in any way. When Cheyenne laughed and gently reminded Karen that a lady does not point fingers, the double addressed the maid and said he would explain. Cheyenne stepped forward, looked Karen in the eyes, and explained that the figure was a fake body created by combining her disguise magic and Zex's mental magic, then asked Karen to consider this decoy the real serial criminal until his return to avoid trouble. The explanation left Karen stunned and confused. With a blush on her cheeks, she could only whisper one quiet question: why? She lunged directly at Cheyenne, her voice trembling with pain, demanding to know why her brother had told her nothing, and why she had to learn the truth from the servant, accusing them both of hiding everything from her since Cheyenne's arrival, while the double of her brother silently stood nearby. More information about Cheyenne at www. Cheyenne echoes calm. Her small hands clenched the fabric of her dress, and one thought kept echoing in her mind: why can't he open up to her? The thought turns into a desperate plea. She's afraid of losing the only person she has, and quietly, shyly asks that he not be taken from her. Overwhelmed by this fear, her face twisted, tears welled up in her eyes, and a dark haze of anxiety seemed to rise from her. Seeing her pain, Shine decides to be honest and admits that she was, at least initially, a spy sent to observe Cyril. Bound by a magical contract, she says she cannot reveal everything, especially nothing that could harm the brothers and sisters. She explains that Cyril relies on her not out of affection, but to keep her under surveillance, and in the end, simply sincerely apologizes. She listens, her face softening as the confession reaches her. Karen says that, given Cheyenne's situation, it was natural for her to act that way, and that admitting guilt is hard for everyone. And despite all this revelation, she still believes that her brother relies on Cheyenne at least a little. Meanwhile, far from the estate, the real Cyril smiled thoughtfully with a crooked smile. He realized that his decoy did not fool his sister even for a moment, bitterly regretted that none of his current memories would transfer to the clone, and that he should have been there to hear her words with his own ears, while at the estate Karen finally fell asleep. Later, Cyril discusses the failure of the decoy with Cheyenne. She confirms that Karen immediately understood it was not him as soon as she saw her, although no one else suspected anything. He wonders whether the trained knights or mages would have seen through the deception, and resolutely decides that the clone must be improved and asks Cheyenne for help, to which she readily agrees. Thoughts returned again to his sister. He asks Cheyenne to precisely describe how Karen reacted upon learning of his absence, asking the maid not to hide any detail. Cheyenne quietly says that Karen waited for his return until she finally fell asleep. Hearing this, Cyril froze and thought his sister is too dependent on him. Her circle is limited to lower-class adults, so her idea of relationships is distorted. Her parents never introduced her to noble children, and he finally understood. It is his fault because he himself deliberately limited her communication only to those he trusts. He stands before Karen, proudly smiling and pointing to the entrance of the estate, saying that he made her a double so she could finally go to the city with him, and Karen raises an uncertain look at him and asks if he is really sure about this. He enthusiastically shows his creation, a raw, simplified doll-like product that does not resemble Karen at all. Karen and her defective copy silently look at each other with empty eyes, and Cyril is forced to admit. They agree it is really bad, and something must be wrong, although he insists that he embedded a perfect copy of their minds into those doubles. Two figures, the real one and the copy, touch hands, and Karen looks down at the joined fingers with a confused expression. The failure of the decoy pushes them to a new strategy. Cyril explains the technical problem to Cheyenne. The clone is just a shapeless lump of his mana, intangible like light. To bypass this, a person is needed to create a cover, so he asks Cheyenne to cast a masking spell on him, and she calmly and professionally nods and agrees. When the spell worked, their appearance changed. Cyril now had chestnut hair and glasses. Karen also had chestnut hair, and both had green eyes. He told her that this look was needed to not stand out, and so that other children in the town would not recognize them, and Karen just giggled with joy. She liked it because now they looked alike. Now disguised in simple clothes, they walk the city streets holding hands, and Karen quietly hums a joyful song about traveling together. He looks at his radiant little sister. His cheeks blush with pride because she is so extraordinarily sweet. A woman passes by and aloud remarks what a sweet pair of children they are. Wandering through the market, they go where Karen points into a small alley. There they find a white cat, both squat down to greet it, and the cat meowed in response to their attention. Walking down a busy street, Karen suddenly freezes, her eyes wide open in amazement, and she tightly squeezes Cyril's hand, enchanted by the sight of several other children running and playing nearby. She pulls him by the sleeve and, bursting with excitement, points, "Children." She tells him to look. She had never seen other children before except us, and Cyril looks at her with pain in his chest. She reacts as if she just saw some rare animal. He watched in fright as one of the children suddenly tripped and fell face down. Nearby, Karen stood silently, her face expressionless. Before he could react, Karen rushed to the fallen boy, knelt down, and asked if he was okay. Her sudden appearance instantly attracted the attention of the other children. They immediately surrounded her and bombarded her with questions. Who she was, if she had just moved here, and if she and Cyril were relatives. Seeing the group's curiosity, Cyril stepped forward with a friendly smile, introduced himself, and confirmed that they were indeed new. When he spoke, Karen turned to him, her hands nervously clenched. She quietly asked if she could introduce herself, and gathering courage, she turned back to the children and with a slight blush shyly asked if she could play with them. Her formal request was met with slight surprise. The children whispered among themselves, noticing that she spoke like an adult. Karen's face darkened. She was afraid she had said something strange, but one of the boys quickly dismissed this worry, said it was okay, and enthusiastically invited everyone to play with. The group started playing rock, paper, scissors. Cyril stood nearby, feeling a wave of relief wash over him, thinking that the servants at home would probably faint seeing Karen communicate so freely, but she needed to learn not just to command people. We hope that this experience would teach her to think independently, to sincerely ask for what she needs, and to trust people at their word. It was a decisive step in her growth. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the children shouted and asked if he would join them. He agreed, turned around, and followed the group, remaining unnoticed by the children, shyly watching them from a shelter near the door. Later that evening, during bathing, Karen was glowing with excitement, recounting every detail of her day and vividly describing what her new friends, Dan and Miria, said and did while she was shy and taking care of them. She shyly and gently said it was time to rinse her hair, poured water over her head. Carrillo smiled and asked his sister if she had fun, and Karen beamed with happiness and gladly replied yes. She lifts her eyes from the bath to her brother, hope burning in her gaze with her. They can go play again with her new friends. He immediately agrees, and she bursts with joy, throws herself around his neck, hugs him, and loudly confesses her love. Nearby, Shion watches calmly and remarks that a lady does not hug people when she is undressed. Later, sitting with her friends, Karen listens as Miria enviously complains about her brother. Then another girl adds that Karen's brother is incredibly cool, and Karen proudly says that he is her pride and joy. Myriad continues listing her grievances. Her brother instantly gets angry, hits people, smells bad, and even took a tomato right off her plate. In the distance, he is seen roughly pushing another boy. The memory fades as the children decide to play hide and seek and start a game of rock, paper, scissors to determine who will be the seeker. As soon as he starts counting, the other children scatter in all directions, shouting, "Close your eyes and count to 100. He notices that Karen stayed behind, asks what is wrong, urges her to hurry and hide, and inside pulls himself together, thinking that he will probably lose after all. He lost the first game. His determined expression softens when he realizes why she hesitates. Karen tugs at his shirt and calls him not Zex, but brother. He leaned toward her and gently explained that she needed to learn to walk around the city on her own. This was a very important experience for her future, and then softly asked if she could do it. Quietly whispering, "Okay," Karen ran to hide, and he watched her with a tender smile, thinking about how she was growing up, and remembered that because of the age at which he died in his past life, he felt more like a father than a brother, pleased with this progress. As his countdown neared the end, Karen panicked looking for a place to hide, chose a doorframe nearby while other children called her. Just as the countdown reached 99, a large dark hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, silencing her surprise, and the last number echoed in the alley 100. He turned around in the middle of the empty city square and shouted into the air, thus starting the search. "Are you ready?" A gloved hand covers the mouth of a young girl, her green eyes wide open in shock. Chaos erupts on the street below. Men grab children. One man grabs Karen. She fiercely struggles, and he hisses for her to be quiet. Another man demands to know who these salons are, and a third shouts for them to release the children. The cruel present contrasts with a tender memory. Carrillo kneeling before Karen, offering her a small bouquet. But this memory shatters against reality. Karen tries to shout a warning to Dan. He looks around confused, and at that moment, a large man looms over him. This moment is called the promise between brother and sister. Elsewhere, a boy with light brown chestnut hair and glasses covers his face with his hands, and a voice, as if counting down before a game, asks if he is ready. He stands alone in the city square and calls into the deep silence. When no one answers, he jokingly tells himself that they are almost dead. He stretches, realizing that no one will respond to such a grim joke, and for a moment considers using his detection magic, which would allow him to instantly find everyone. He decides not to do it. The boy recalls the principles of the attribute-free spell he invented himself. The detection spell sends waves of his mana to tap the mana around and find others, since everyone has at least a little. He dismisses this thought. He believes relying on such a method would be childish. With renewed determination, he decides to search for them truly, with his own eyes and feet. Let's begin, he tells himself his. The search quickly yielded results. He noticed a group of children hiding and shouted that he found them. They complained that he was too fast, and the boy named Zex laughed triumphantly and boasted that this is what happens when the one once called a weirdo takes things seriously. Despite the joking victory, a strange feeling of anxiety creeps up on him. He mentally counts the children he still needs to find. Karen, Den, and Tara, while the others he has already found, including Miria and Den, gather around him. The vague unease suddenly sharpens into a dreadful premonition, a clear feeling that something is very wrong. He instantly recognizes the mana surge. It is an emergency signal agreed upon by him and Karen, a distress call in case something terrible happens. An irritable woman shouted Zex at him, and he stopped, focused, cast a detection spell, instantly catching Karen's magical signature in the nearby alley. Deciding that the roofs are faster, he fueled his body with magic and dashed across them. His senses detected that Karen, Den, and Miria were together, Tara a bit further, and nearby 3 more mana traces he did not recognize. He descends into the alley and gasps. Karen is held by 3 large, threatening men. The sight stuns him, and he knows he cannot just rush in without a plan. Settling on the roof, he forces himself to calm down and think. A direct attack is risky if he rushes in. One of them might threaten the hostage before he can neutralize them all. Meanwhile, in the alley below, Karen, with her hands tied behind her back and a gag in her mouth, looks frightened. She desperately thinks about what to do. Just as the men are about to leave, Tara suddenly appears with a stick in her hands and shouts to give back her brother, and Kirill watches in shock as one of the kidnappers turns and sees in her just another target. Her reckless courage creates the perfect chance. When all 3 kidnappers are now fully focused on Terry, Cyril realizes his chance and jumps from the roof. He understands that simply falling under gravity is too slow. In the air, he compresses mana under his feet, creating a strong support from which he shoots forward at explosive speed. He hit the first with a powerful blow to the face, immediately turned and unleashed a devastating strike on the second. 2 down, he thought, 1 left. The boy in glasses dodges the kidnapper's clumsy swing and desperately realizes, even with physical enhancement 5 times over, he still has the strength of a 4-year-old child. The kidnapper grabs him, and he fears he won't manage against an adult, regrets never learning martial arts, and knows he must hurry before the other 2 come to their senses. Suddenly, the man holding him is engulfed in a burst of flame. Below, Karen stands with outstretched arms, her eyes wide open in shock because of the powerful magic she just unleashed. The burning man screams in pain, wildly thrashing about. The boy breaks free from his grip, shouting for him to let go, when a second kidnapper appears nearby. The unharmed kidnapper sneaks up from behind, his face twisted with rage. They pulled him out, and the second kidnapper intervened, indifferently saying that as a last mercy, he would extinguish the fire, but could not guarantee the man's hair follicles would remain unharmed. The first kidnapper fell unconscious, smoldering and smoking, while the boy screamed for his brother. The boy falls to the ground, blood flowing from his head. The wound is terrible. Tara and Miria rush to him, desperately calling his name and begging him to respond. Hera is on her knees over him in panic. She doesn't know what to do. The bleeding doesn't stop, and she is gripped by terrible horror. Her brother is dying. When the last kidnapper turns his attention to Karen, the wounded boy shouts a spell with his last strength, hide, because he understands things are very bad. Karen looks in horror as the man's hand reaches for the boy and whispers a plea for help. The spell works. The kidnapper freezes, listening confusedly and staring into the empty alley, sure he heard a voice but sees no one. The concealment worked. Tara and the unconscious boy hid on a neighboring roof, and the man turns back to the crying Karen and takes her hand. But Karen ignores the man's grip and instead approaches the wounded boy. Gentle, sparkling light flows from her hands as she places them on his wound and weaves a powerful healing spell. Under her touch, the expression of pain on his face softens, and the boy quietly sinks into peaceful unconsciousness. In a moment, the light went out. Karen said that now everything was fine. The boy got up and touched his head in disbelief. There was no pain, although he was sure he had been beaten to pulp, and from relief Tara rushed to hug him, crying that she was so happy and afraid he would die. He croaked for her not to declare him dead so easily, but when his gaze fell on Karen, he understood everything. He and the other children surrounded the newcomers. One girl asked Karen if she had a different hair color, but Den quickly scolded her and explained that golden hair is a sign of a saint, and Kirill, hearing the children call him brother, noticed Karen's lowered gaze and called her by name. Their meeting ended, and under the wide sky stretched above them, they set off on the road, moving away from the town. They walked along a quiet path, leaving behind trials and a small settlement. Suddenly Karen's step faltered, and she stopped. Cyril turned around, his voice trembling with anxiety as he called her by name. She looked at the ground, her voice trembling, apologizing for breaking her promise and confessing that she had been a bad girl. In response, he gently lifted her into his arms. He carried her, she buried her face in his shoulder and begged, "Don't hate me." He immediately brushed off her fears and insisted that he was the one who should apologize. He had taken too long to reach her. Her eyes filled with tears, and she asked if she had been helpful. It was then that he noticed a fresh red wound on her arm. She explained that it was just a small burn from using fire magic on the ropes. He assured her that she had helped a lot. He understood that her desire to save Den was so strong that it overshadowed her promise to him, and she tearfully confirmed this. He gently explained that if he had forbidden her to go, Den would not have been safe. He continued and said that she had nothing to apologize for and that she should be proud of herself, calling her a sister he could be proud of, confident that she would support him just as he would support her, because as close family, they must support each other. Her mood lifted, she beamed with a smile and agreed, promising to help him whenever he got into trouble. He smiled, mentally noting how beautifully she was growing up, and when the first evening star appeared in the twilight sky, he quietly wished that she would grow up without new problems. A week passed since the attack on Karen and the other children. The consequences were resolved relatively smoothly. To keep the secret, Cyril first asked Den and the other children to remain silent. Since he had saved their lives, they agreed without hesitation. Then, pressing them a little, he warned them never to speak about Karen's ability to use light magic. Den, on the contrary, declared passionately that he would tell everyone, and Miria immediately called him an idiot. Then he recalled the events that led them into this trouble. It all started when a man collapsed on the street, like a drunk. When Cheyenne asked how they ended up here, Karen explained that as a daughter of the Fournette family, she considered it her duty to find out how her people lived, and Cyril blamed himself entirely. He could not refuse her, and said regretfully that he had not even suspected such a dangerous place in the city. Maybe they will refuse, although she so sincerely stated that it was her duty to improve the life of their people. Moving through the ruined streets, Kirill finally sees the place they were heading to. Here it is. They approached the figure, hunched under a dirty cloak with a hood. The face was hidden in shadow, and that person sharply asked what the children were looking at, warning them, "Get out of here, this is not a place for children." The boy flinched at the hostile tone, but Kirill calmly asked her to calm down because he felt, despite the harsh words, the person was simply concerned about their safety, and he was sure of his. The inner monologue continued, whispering that it was precisely his protective nature that made this person the best for negotiations. He recognized him Pablo, a representative of the foreign auto ghetto at the edge of their territory. He stepped forward and addressed the man Pablo Dono. Realizing that he might be confused because a child was approaching him, Cyril officially introduced himself. "My name is Zex Levitt Yusin Fornata. I am the son of Lord Fornata. We have come here to negotiate with you." Abel doubted whether negotiations made any sense at all, and Cyril quietly explained that kidnappers had been operating in the city recently, although they had already been caught. He could not ignore the risk of recurrence, after which he introduced two girls with him. His younger sister Karen and their maid Cheyenne. Hobble snorted and asked what that had to do with him, saying that aristocrats would never help them. Kirill explained that suspicious people often hide in the slums, and asked Pablo as a representative to find out about such people to bring some order. But Pablo took this as an intention to clear the slums and categorically refused. He would not help anything that could harm his friends. He remained silent when a large dark beast attacked the children. The girl Karen screamed in fear, but the man in the hood just waved it off and drove the creature away, and the worried Cyril shouted his sister's name. She began to tell about their trouble, how she arrived in the town and finally found her first friends, who were almost kidnapped. She said that Cyril saved them, but they did not want anyone else, neither friends nor people from the city, to experience the same horror, and with Cyril and Cheyenne behind her, she begged the man to help her brother. She tightly clasped her hands together and swore that she would do anything. Tears stood in her eyes. She fell to her knees before the man in the hood and begged him again and again to help them. The sight froze him in place. He could not comprehend what was happening, a young, noble lady on her knees, begging in the dirty slums. The old man looked distrustfully as Cyril stepped forward and assured that he would not allow the slum residents to be harmed. He explained that they only needed information, and the rest would be decided by his people, who would also strengthen the city's security, and Karen raised her eyes, asking if that was really okay. He gestured to call Cheyenne, and she handed over the heavy bag with money. Cyril offered a monthly payment for Pablo services, an amount that clearly impressed the old man. The offer was too tempting to refuse, and Pablo agreed, saying he would help, but then grabbed his head and muttered that the young man should have started with the money. He grumbled to himself, and Karen, filled with joy, warmly thanked him. She took his worn hand in both of hers, which left the old man speechless for a moment, while Kyrillo watched with a gentle smile. When the group was leaving the slums, Cheyenne anxiously turned to Cyril and asked if one could really trust a man like Pavel, already realizing in her thoughts that loyalty bought with money could just as easily be betrayed for it. She watched tensely as they hesitated over this conversation. Despite his biased opinion that all nobles were enemies, he easily accepted the proposal, and Kirill only had to come up with a convenient excuse for him to agree. Cyril meanwhile seemed to censor his thoughts, explaining that his magic sees emotions, that's why he is so confident in the result. He turned his gaze to Shion and asked her directly, "Are you afraid of me?" Before Shion could respond, Karen interrupted loudly, saying she was not afraid of him at all and that she loved him. Cyril leaned over, kissed his sister on the cheek, thanked her, and said he loved her too. The moment passed, and Shine's face showed no emotion as she began to compose her own response. She herself admitted sharply and clearly she was really afraid of Zex. Later in the dark chamber, Cyril stopped in front of one of the captured kidnappers. The man trembled in the cage and shouted for him not to come closer, calling him a devil. With a creepy smile, Cyril told the prisoner that he had investigated him. He was not just a kidnapper, but a murderer, a true devil who deserved the death penalty, and then aloud he wondered what experiment they would try today. He thought about his magic. His mental debuffs could cause irreversible harm, so he never tested them on ordinary people. But now, with Karen's safety in question, he decided to renounce humanity if necessary and turn a blind eye to any evil to protect her future. While the man in the cage screamed in pain, Cyril decided to use the prisoner to help him progress. The kidnapping affected him so much that he acutely felt his own powerlessness and immediately began to take control of the family. Having convinced several key people in the household, he finally better understood the tangled internal politics of the Fornata holdings. 3 days had passed since he learned about the scale of the danger, and that day he had just turned 6 years old. He stood in the library with the butler Suis, who explained the critical law of the Sacred Kingdom. 10 years after entering the path of nobility, a lord must have 2 sons, and Kirill, raising his head from his short stature, realized that they would have to adopt someone. Looking out the window, he realized that others had probably noticed in his family there were only him and Karen, and he pondered this world where childbirth was deadly for mothers with high mana, and because of this nobles took several wives to have heirs. His thoughts were interrupted by Karen outside. She waved at him with a bright, innocent smile, and he, a silent observer, watched her from his place. He responded with a wave of his hand and a gentle smile, while Sue was asked if there was any news about his mother's pregnancy. Cyril's answer was simple and categorical, no. Continuing the conversation, he asked when his father became a count. Sue confirmed 9 years ago, so only 1 year remained. Cyril anxiously noted that the family could be disbanded or expelled, and inquired whether it was even possible to adopt a stranger's child, since the Fornata family was recorded as fire blood, a trait he felt in his genes, although he had no magical gift. Suis explained that the law allows adoption if there is no son or if the first son dies. In such a case, the state rewrites the record of the bloodline, and this thought struck Kirill. This law could allow some stranger to take their entire family. After that, Sua handed over a folder stating that the Baron had already made him an adoption offer. When Cyril took the documents, a strange feeling of familiarity with the idea of family capture swept over him. He scanned the page with his eyes, and his face instantly twisted in pure shock when he recognized what was written. Sue noticed the sudden change in the boy's behavior, leaned forward a little, and asked, "Is something wrong?" The shock quickly receded, leaving a cold, determined look. He stared intently at the name on the paper. Orca Fargata sent Bayakata and calmly ordered Suez to proceed with the adoption. The butler, without hesitation, bowed and accepted the order. Suddenly he remembered the details of that game he once played. The child he was adopting, Orca, was one of the possible romantic lines. In the storyline of this character, Orca was supposed to usurp power in the family of his rival, the Forned family. This future conflict had its roots in the very structure of the Holy Kingdom, a country that was simultaneously a constitutional monarchy and half a theocracy. Here existed 2 main religious currents. One proclaimed the god of humans supreme, subordinating all other gods to him, while the other considered all gods equal, and from these differences grew deep, ancient tensions. This split ignited discrimination against beastfolk. Monotheists claimed that humans were superior. Although the current royal family was among pluralists and restrained the worst persecutions, beastfolk nobles still had to navigate treacherous politics, and Orca's family, Bayakudai, when the conflict began to brew and to survive, gave their youngest child up for adoption. And now that child had arrived. In the garden, the butler announced that Orca herself was here. Cyril noticed how quickly things were moving. Not even a month had passed since he agreed. He ordered the butler to escort the guest to the living room, saying he would join soon. When the man bowed and left, Cyril turned to his sister. "Let's go, Karen." Walking, he tensed. In a year, a civil war was supposed to break out, which would either destroy the Baron's family and the lineage in which Orca was born, or turn them into slaves. So far events were unfolding exactly according to the game's plot. A thin voice sounded in the living room, its owner slightly twitching large fluffy ears. "Nice to meet you," said the child. "It is a great honor." This voice belonged to the child now considered the lowest. Nervously settling on the sofa, the boy introduced himself. "My name is Orca Fargata, Bayakudai. Please take care of me." Cyril froze, enchanted. An internal cry of admiration exploded in his head. The boy was incredibly cute. He barely restrained himself and tried to compose himself. In the game he knew what Orca looked like, but seeing him live was much more striking. The cuteness of this boy was almost frightening. Turning to him, Cyril apologized and introduced himself as Zex, the eldest son of Count Fornet, then introduced his younger sister Caroline, while Karen looked with a blank gaze and wondered if they and her brother were really monsters for mocking such a cute child in the original story. He tries to calm the boy, tells Orca that from now on they are brothers and no need to address formally, but the young beastfolk is still clearly scared, stammering their formal names and agreeing to get along, and Cyril reads fear in his eyes. The boy sincerely apologized, explaining that the long journey exhausted him, and realizing he would have to get along with Orca, Cyril offered to tour the estate, but the butler Suis intervened, admitted his carelessness, and instead offered to take Orca to his room. When the valet leads the little boy away, Cyril makes a tense farewell wave. It is already clear to him that this will be harder than he expected. Nearby Karen watches them go, her face unreadable. During the next week, Orca remains withdrawn and passive, spending most days sitting in his room. When he rarely goes out, he is terribly timid and jumps up with a frightened scream at the mere mention of his name. Cyril runs through the past week in his head and bitterly admits that his attempts to relax the boy have failed, so he knows the tactic must change. Their future is at stake, and he will have to act more directly to get closer to him. His new plan is a tea party. He announces that the participants will be himself, Karen, and a very frightened Orca, and Shion will treat them to delicious tea and treats in a beautiful garden. He is convinced that the conversation will blossom. Tea party begins, but the air is heavy with silence. Shion stands straight, Karen drinks tea with a gloomy expression, and Orca silently looks at his knees and nervously bites his lips. Cyril is puzzled by this mood. Orca's silence is understandable to him, but he clearly remembers how Karen was delighted at the thought of having tea with her beloved older brother. And now she looks over the rim of the cup, and her silence breathes hostility. He tries to save the situation, asks them to relax, and enjoy the party he organized to bring them closer as family. Prompted by Shine, he wants to say something, but Karen coldly interrupts, saying he didn't say a word, that this party is in honor of their new brother or sister. She thought it was just for the two of them, and realizing his mistake hits zero like thunder. He apologized for the sudden introduction, but since everyone was present, he suggested taking the opportunity to get acquainted after all. He reasoned that from now on they would have to support each other as family. Karen did not yield to his pleas. With a cold look, she said that it was quite enough for her if only the two of them supported each other, and her sharp refusal made Cyril shudder, nervous, sweat gleaming on his forehead. Trying to save the situation, he gently reproached Karen, asking her to think about Orca's feelings after all. She herself is in an unfamiliar place, then turned to the shy boy, trying to calm him with words that his younger sister is actually very kind, and Orca could only agree uncertainly. Despite the assurances, Orca was still noticeably scared, his small hands trembling as he looked at his teacups. He was afraid for a reason. Across the table, Karen silently stared at him with a vigilant, burning gaze. Her eyes radiated undisguised hostility. This malice made Orca scream in horror, and Cyril found himself helplessly caught between them. The tea party turned into a tense, unbearable silence, and Karen calmly sipped tea, as if she were innocence itself. Orco slumped in his chair, completely depressed, and Cyril only kept sweating, thinking about how his plan with the best intentions could have failed so terribly. In the forest thicket, Cyril enhances his physical abilities with body fortification magic and simultaneously casts a detection spell, sending magical pulses in search of targets. Revealed detects a large black snake, which he confidently dodges when it attacks. He thinks that he hunts these magical monsters to gain real combat experience in non-elemental magic, like grinding in a game, and his senses are already aimed at the next creature 100 meters away. He also points his finger like a gun. A dazzling spark of energy bursts from his fingertip. He releases a spell called Shot, mentally telling himself that this is the last one. Projectile hits a distant target, leaving scorched earth and smoldering trees. He sighs and blows on his fingertip. The spell's efficiency is terrible. Each shot burns almost all the mana in his body. The training is over. He meets with Cheyenne and tells her that it's time to return. Inside, a thought gnaws at him that the problem is his weak self-control. Admitting this, he realizes he still has a long way to go. Cheyenne addresses him formally, Lord Zex. His thoughts instantly return to the servant beside him. He recalls the magical oath he imposed on her. not to disclose anything about the brothers and sisters, but suddenly he realizes with horror that it does not apply to Orca. This loophole allows her to pass information to her master, and he does not understand whether this will ultimately be a good or bad fake. He's still weighing options because he knows that depending on our next steps, he might have to behave differently with Cheyenne. But for now, he decides to put Karen first, and Cheyenne agrees she thinks it's better to call Lady Karen in advance. Despite his efforts, a huge emotional chasm has spread between the two children. Karen and Orca stand back to back, as if they do not want or cannot open up to each other. This problem gnaws at Shine. As they leave, she asks him for a minute and confesses that she is stuck. Karen's rejection of Orca is deeper than she thought, and her complex about her brother is even more vivid than she expected. But one remark caught him by surprise. Cheyenne continued that today he looked quite nervous, and these words made him freeze. He admitted to himself that he seriously underestimated the complexity of this situation. He could not believe her sincere concern. She cares so much about him, even though he was the one who bound her with the spell of the oath. He asks her for ideas on how to overcome the chasm between Karen and Orca. Cheyenne suggests, if more communication didn't help, start with separate conversations with each. Cyril agrees. He dedicates the rest of the day to training and thinks that although monster hunting at the academy is an easier way to become stronger, today's run was more for stress relief. Looking at the forest, he notices that the sun is already setting. In this world, there is no level system, but everyone knows defeating magical monsters makes you stronger. The status screen of the Temple Knight student shows his current stats and skills. Magical Beast is a creature that has accumulated surrounding mana and transformed into a fierce, hostile species to humans. It is said that killing such a creature supposedly allows one to absorb its excess mana, but this has never been proven, and Kirill directs a dark energy explosion at one of these creatures. Later, walking with Shion, she continues to advise. She says that since Orca appeared, he started avoiding one-on-one meetings with Karen. When he realizes she is right, he listens as she insists, find time just for the two of you. Maybe then you will truly hear what is in her heart, and he thanks her, admitting that her advice helps him. But she senses danger well for a nobleman. To give a spy the weak points of his family means playing at too high stakes. Following her advice, Kirill comes to Karen in her room, thanks her for coming and says they haven't seen each other for a long time. She reminds him that after his 5th birthday they were given separate rooms, and he recalls how she then made a scene, demanding a room as large as his, but at least she was straightforward. She sits opposite him with a serious expression and immediately asks why Orca is not with him today. This question completely catches him off guard. Suddenly he bows low, loudly apologizing and stunning her. He says he didn't notice how long it had been since they had a chance to talk alone, admitting that it was all his fault and that he was stubborn for no reason. Bowing his head, he continues to apologize. He admits that he pushed her to befriend Orca, disregarding her feelings, and regrets how bad a big brother he was. Erin quickly denies this. Her voice trembles with emotion. She insists that he is not failing at all. He is the best big brother to her. She accepts his apology and asks him to lift his head. Relieved, Cyril thanks her. Then she herself admits. She was jealous. It was the same with Cheyenne. She says, only then she was too young to understand her feelings, and now she finally understands them. Her words lay everything out clearly for Cyril, says Karen, and admits that it hurt her to see his attention turn elsewhere. When he was so concerned about Orca, she felt uneasy, as if her older brother might one day become his. An image surfaced in her memory. Cyril turned away from her, and she felt as if she was the one being left behind. Hearing her candid fears, Cyril stood up and hugged her tightly, apologizing for having worried her so much. Karen looked up at him, and surprise and relief mixed on her face. He holds her close and whispers that she is the first in his heart. He understands that as nobles they will have more duties and connections with others, but he swears that one thing, her place in his heart, will never change. He stepped back a little so their eyes could meet, reassured her again that she is his only, dearest little sister, and knowing that jealousy might return, asked her to remember his promise. Moved, Karen agreed and asked that if she ever felt that way again, he would hold her just like that. Her thoughts drift back to those old days when, being younger, she admitted that she envied Cheyenne and could not understand the feeling that. Memory reinforced her old anxiety. When she saw Cyril paying attention to another, she was gripped by the fear that he would stop being her older brother and become someone else's. She watched him turn to leave the library, and a familiar pang of anxiety rose within her. Brother, she called softly, but when he stepped aside, a desperate thought flashed through her mind. She could not bear the thought of being left behind. Cyril apologizes for suddenly calling Orca, offers her a cup of tea to calm her down a bit. The girl trembles, her cat ears twitch nervously. She accepts the cup, and as she raises it to her lips, Cyril watches intently. She drinks the tea in one gulp, her cheeks burning, and a wave of warmth and relief envelops her. The effect is immediate. her tail starts wagging so hard it bangs against the furniture. Cyril asks if she liked it. She replies energetically, yes, but he thinks to himself that it's not quite right yet. Seeing her reaction, he offered to pour her another cup. Orca was flustered and, blushing, insisted that she would never allow Zek-sama to serve her. Cyril just smiled and assured her that it was fine, he always does this, and he is glad she likes his special blend. He admits that brewing tea was his hobby even in a past life, and that he even has several certificates. Orca simply froze from this. The shock is so strong that she suddenly throws herself onto the table and sincerely apologizes, thinking that she might have belittled his passion. Cyril calmly says not to worry, he does not blame her, but despite his reassurance, Orca's ears tremble, and she thinks to herself that he is a little scared. Leaning over the table, she hurriedly explained that she reacted simply out of shock, and that he is not at all the one she had imagined, a son of a noble family. She paints this picture with words. The high nobility are arrogant beings who toy with people and humiliate those lower than them just for amusement. All the while, Kirill listens with a gentle smile and assures her that he will not get angry no matter what she says. The calm expression disappears from his face when he is overwhelmed by a humiliating realization. He instantly recognizes her description. This is exactly how he and his sister behave in the game. This feeling grew out of the cruel reality of their world, where the high nobility treat commoners like tools. They trample the lower ones, and the misfortunes of others are a sweet pleasure they savor and crush. Cyril recalled the events of the original story in that timeline. He and his sister bullied Orca's foster brother, treating him like a punching bag. These torments lasted until the heroine, the saint, found him. She slowly healed his wounds, both physical and emotional, ultimately helped him overcome the terrible Fornat family, and took him away. That is the whole story of Orca. Everything became clear. That is why the boy avoided them so much. Cyril realized that, most likely, Orca was already being harassed by children from hostile factions, even in his native Bayakut barony. Kirill addressed Orca directly, sincerely in his voice, admitting that it was hard to believe, but assuring the boy that the current Fornat family is on his side and that he and Karen will never betray him. Orca shuddered, stunned by these words. A quiet ray of hope was added to his promise. It seemed these words had an effect. Orca stood up and, tapping, left the room, only glancing back from the corridor for a moment. Kirill made a small, encouraging wave. Then his face became serious. He pondered what needed to be done. Outside, the captain of the guard approached him. He laughed, admitting that he almost lost patience when he saw them playing cards in broad daylight, but sincerely thanked Kirill for his leniency, and added that since Kirill began observing their training, everyone treats them much more seriously. He answered calmly, said that he understood if they still could not believe him, and simply asked to stay informed and vigilant, because nothing would start if they remained in ignorance. His thoughts returned again to the conversation inside. Karen spoke gently and sincerely. Although she hoped they could become a real family, he had to move at his own pace. Orca simply quietly agreed. Seeing Orca to the door, Kirill felt that this was a good first step. He believed that if they continued to see and communicate more often, Orca would sooner or later open his heart to them. His gaze fell again on the training guards. Their worn armor and dulled swords cried out for replacement, and he mentally noted that he would have to set aside money for new ones. In the corridor, he ran into Orca. She asked if the boy was going to the history lesson. He gently said that the formal suffix, sama, need not be added to him. Embarrassed, Orca confirmed that he was going there and still addressed him as Zek-sama. During the lesson, the teacher asked a question about the reforms of a certain historical figure, and Karen instantly and correctly answered, listing the achievements: fighting floods, land reform, and the introduction of sewage. When he turned to Orca, he only lowered his eyes to the book and admitted that he did not know. With a satisfied smile, Karen accepted the tutor's praise for studying so well. Her confidence only deepened Orca's feeling of defeat, and he turned away, ashamed. The feeling of his own inferiority pressed on him. He bowed deeply to Kirill, apologizing for stopping him, and bowing his head, anxiously asked if he would still take him as a personal tutor, confessing that he was not worthy of such an honor. In the classroom, the tutor pressed him even harder, demanding to name the 3 main achievements of the Third Holy King, and Orca stammered, managed to recall only the fight against floods, and fell silent. He did not immediately understand Karen's expression, took it for reproach, turned around and apologized warmly, assuring that he would never say a word untimely, especially in front of her. Karen, stunned, tried to explain that she meant nothing of the sort. Meanwhile, Cyril sat at the table and listened to the report about these events. His face serious, he listened carefully to the details and quietly muttered that he understood the situation. In front of him stood the tutor and the butler. Calmly smiling, he thanked the woman for the report and dismissed her, and when the door slammed, the butler nodded a sign that the order was accepted. As soon as they were alone, his formality melted away. He leaned forward on the table and groaned how hard it was to raise children, and the butler nearby only agreed. Heron sighed heavily. She knew today had been hard, but her thoughts still returned to Orca. He was no less irritable in his own way. He never spoke about himself. Seeking distraction, she walked through the gardens and approached the gardener tending a flower bed. She thanked him for his hard work and asked what he planned, and the gardener looked up and recognized Lady Karen. He explained that he was currently just mixing fertilizer into the soil, and they would plant after everything settled. Then he asked if she had any particular flower she would like. Karen thought for a moment. After a minute, an idea came to her. Any flower will do, she told him, as long as it is pale violet, the same color as my brother's eyes, and the gardener chuckled warmly, noticing that she truly adored Zexama. Her cheeks blossomed with tenderness. Of course, she said he was her brother. She loved him more than anyone in the world. Having asked, she turned and walked away, telling the gardener that she would eagerly await the flowers and take care of them herself. Walking along the path, she heard a muffled sound, stopped, puzzled there should have been no one there. Listening to the bushes, she found the source of the noise. Something was huddled among the leaves. It was Orca trying to make himself as small as possible. In a quiet corner of the forest, Karen finds Orca sitting alone and covering his mouth with his hand, and gently calls him by name. She approaches closer and freezes. Tears are streaming down his face. The boy is crying. Her heart pounds with guilt. She falls to her knees, tormented by the thought that it might be because of her meanness that he cried, and she vows to herself that she never wanted to bring him to tears. She froze, not knowing what to do. Approaching could only scare him more, but the thought that he would avoid her was unbearable. Suddenly, her mother flashed through her mind, and this intensified her anxiety. Orco continues to cry quietly, thinking about his father and brothers from whom he was torn away. When Karen looks at him, she begins to understand his pain and imagines how she would feel if she were torn from her own brother and forced to live in a strange place. Having made a decision, Karen goes to Cyril's office. She stands in front of his desk and asks if she can take work with her to the city. He agrees but sets a condition. Both must use concealment magic. Karen agrees without hesitation, and when she leaves, Cyril quietly hopes her plan will succeed. Later, in the city quarter where non-humans live, a boy with glasses stands aside and watches Karen and Orco walking together. Worry is on his face. Mentally, he notes that they had never gotten along before. Suddenly, a group of children rushes up to them. A girl named Tara happily greets Karen. Another boy, Dan, points at Orco and asks Karen if he is her friend. He stood silently when one of the children directly pointed at him and said he was strange. Another immediately picked up on it, and Orco was stunned. The accusation unleashed a flood of painful memories. He knew it. This place was the same as before. Shadowy, contemptuous faces of nobles appeared before his eyes, their disdain for the beastmen living among them, and the humiliation when he was thrown to the ground like an animal. His dark thoughts were suddenly interrupted by another child, a girl with ears like an animal. She looked closely at him and asked if he was the girl who did not like to wear skirts. The boy with glasses immediately defended him, saying that girls have the right to wear pants, and another boy sharply grumbled for him to be quiet. In this commotion, Orco quietly corrected he was a boy, and immediately a wave of shy apologies swept through the group. Karen suggests playing hide and seek to ease the tension, and Orco feels a sharp reproach toward himself. He is ashamed that he immediately decided everything wrong. Karen says her brother stayed home and she will count. Noticing his lowered gaze, she gently takes his hand and leads him along, urging him to go with her, and simultaneously begins to count. She does not hide. She leads him through the lively streets of the town, and Orca silently watches in quiet amazement. Other animals calmly go about their business, carry goods, and casually interact with people, a sight completely unfamiliar to his past. He stops, his gaze distant, turns to Karen and quietly asks why she invited him to the city. Sitting on a nearby crate, Karen looks at him with a warm smile and explains that she simply wants him to meet Fornata. Then she asked him to no longer attach the polite suffix sama to her name, and Karen added, although her brother is a true genius, she believes she notices what he does not see and wants to show Orca those corners of the world that her brilliant brother might miss. The tension after their previous meeting began to ease when one of the girls apologized to her and Orca for coming between them. But immediately after the apology, she boldly added that she would never give up being number one for her brother. When another girl left, she turned to Orca with a gloomy expression and also apologized, confessing that she had behaved coldly because she was afraid that he would take her brother away from her. Her vulnerability hung in the air for a moment, but then she beamed with a blush on her cheeks. Since they both apologized, she suggested considering everything resolved and asked to be called Karo, and Orca, shy but sincere, cautiously tried Karanchan. That was enough to make her blossom with joy and praise his attempt. Karen smiled gently and kindly remarked to Orca that a sister should not be angry at her younger brother, proudly adding that from now on he can count on his older sister. Orca, embarrassed, pointed out that he is older than her, but Karen simply confirmed her new role once again. Standing on the balcony, Cyril watched the scene and thought that perhaps he was too overprotective and needed to let them grow up on their own. Seeing Karen so happy because she finally has a little sister she always dreamed of comforted him, and even when it turned out to be a little brother, he understood there was nothing to worry about. Year passes since Orca joined the Fornat family. Now he has grown and excitedly rushes through the mansion corridors, anticipating tomorrow's sword training with Cyril, whom he calls older brother Zex, impatiently asking permission to practice magic with Karen, and Cyril agrees, only reminding him, "Do not deviate from the basics." Then Orca runs up to two maids, asks if they have seen Karen, and they say she just went downstairs. Downstairs, Karen, blushing, covers her mouth with her hand as another girl offers her a small round cookie. The girl puts the cookie into Karen's mouth just as Orca appears, drawn by the delicious smell. He exclaims, snacking again, and Karen cheerfully greets him and announces him as part of the snack club. Meanwhile, Cyril stands alone in the garden, sighing and wondering where the two of them have gone. His question is answered when Karen, Orca, and their friend run in, apologizing for being late. Cyril notices cookie crumbs around Karen's and Orca's mouths, and a faint smile plays on his lips. He mentally rejoices at how well Orca has settled in. In his father's office, Cyril reports on his progress. He says that since taking control of the Overseas Audit District, he has implemented a bunch of reforms and promoted talented people regardless of their status. So now that district runs like clockwork even without him, and this is a sign that it's time to move on to the next stage of his plans. Later, Cyril appears before Shion and Pobble in a new-look black-dyed hair and a white mask covering the upper part of his face. He says that children cannot officially become adventurers, so he has to act incognito, and knowing that dark elves sometimes dye their hair to hide their features, he decided to go all out with the transformation. Pobble notices his enthusiasm, and Cyril honestly admits that as a boy from the modern world, the opportunity to become an adventurer is a real thrill for him. He approaches the Adventurers Guild counter, reminding himself to focus. He addresses the woman behind the counter and says he wants to register as an adventurer, and she smiles as she hands him a form and explains that without it they won't issue a guild card. He lays out his plan. This mask will come in handy where Zex from the Fornato family cannot step, because by registering with the guild, he will officially establish a new identity, receive an ID, and be able to collect materials from monsters, buy weapons and armor, and train without arousing suspicion that would arise if a noble directly provided for his knights. Since his father is still the official lord of the Fornato lands, he prefers to avoid unnecessary attention. With the registration form in hand, he approaches the counter. The guild receptionist confirmed his name Mr. Says and handed him a guild card, asking him to infuse it with mana to make it his own, and offered to explain the rules, but he, with Shion nearby, waved off briefly no need. From a neighboring table, some adventurer shouted at him. A group of adventurers laughs at his black-dyed hair, calls him a self-absorbed poser, and advises Shion to ditch him and join them. One of them approaches closer, bares fangs in his face, and threateningly asks if he is looking for a fight. In response, Says releases a silent, crushing wave of intimidation. The pressure of his will crashes down on the three men and forces them to freeze in terror. The lead adventurer shouted he even wet himself out of fear. As they walked away with Shine, she quietly asked if his performance was too much, and he admitted that he mixed a bit of mental paralysis magic into the intimidation spell and probably overdid the power. He reassures her, no one here senses mana, so his involvement will go unnoticed. Then he looks at Cheyenne and says that thanks to his training she was able to feel mana, and quietly nods in approval. Shane doubted was it really right to teach such a skill to a person in her place. He waved it off, smiling, saying it was nothing, everything was fine, you yourself taught me a lot, so I will rely on you again to prepare for this new adventure. At the exit from the guild hall, he solemnly places his trust in her, calling her instructor Shion, and she accepts this role with a simple, yes, sir. Weeks pass, and under the watchful eye of Cheyenne Says, he takes on various requests. One day she teaches him to gather plants and says, if the order does not specify which part is needed, it is safer to bring the whole plant. He loses his balance during training and falls backward, but Cheyenne instantly casts a spell that softens his fall, calls his name anxiously, and reminds him to always watch his step. After the session, he says he can manage on his own for now. He explains that having reached the E-class, he is no longer a novice and cannot rely on her forever, and Cheyenne listens, but anxiety is still visible on her face. After a few weeks, Shane's anxiety did not pass. She asks him again if he will really be okay alone, while Karen and Orca quietly watch the scene from the balcony above. Cyril gently calms his servant, says she is too worried, and interrupts her as she is about to leave with him. On the balcony, Orca nods to get Karen's attention and points at Cyril, joking that his brother is up to it again. Karen asks in surprise if Cyril has really been sneaking out somewhere lately without saying anything. Among them, unaware that brothers and sisters are watching him closely, Cyril leaves the estate with a determined expression, ready for the next adventure. From above, Orc loudly confirms Karen's suspicion. On the dirt path among the grass, 3 figures stood still. 2 pairs of small, polished shoes with stockings stood opposite 1 pair of sturdy, worn boots. Behind the tree, the owner of the boots is peeking a boy with reddish-brown hair and glasses, and then suddenly he jumps into view. He was met by Orca and Karen. Orca instantly recognized him and exclaimed, "Brother." But Karen cut her off, reminding that following someone is impolite, then turned to the boy Cyril and explained that she and Orca were just walking to the city together. Her face softens, and she asks with a hopeful smile if he is also going to the city. Although he is clearly reluctant, both children are now pulling him. He sighs quietly to himself and decides that he will have to somehow break away from them as soon as they reach the city. As they walked on, Karen recalled a rumor that someone had recently been involved in adventurous and asked Orca if he knew anything about it. Orca thoughtfully guessed it might be the night captain, while a man in a butler's uniform silently watched them from afar. With a despairing look, Kirill slightly raises his hands and confesses, "Yes, it's me." His confession instantly changes the mood. Karen approaches him harshly, saying she heard he hunts monsters, and this needs to be seriously discussed. Her words are reinforced by a glance into the forest where the knights are visible, and their captain grimly says they lack people to reduce the number of monsters. The scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where an employee eagerly explains its purpose. It is a government institution where residents and merchants submit applications for taming monsters on roads and farms, a system that simultaneously strengthens the country's security and provides jobs for adventurers. Cyril presents them with the problem. Their possession, Forenata, has no signature goods and is declining, so adventurers do not come here because of this. He explains he himself must exterminate the monsters. He listens as Karen insists that the danger of his job is the reason they must help ease his burden, and Orca stands nearby, resolutely agreeing. Orca explains, and sincerity is visible on her face, is worried about Zexbro, and says that in real combat there are no guarantees. Kirill silently weighs her words, balancing the benefits of field experience against the risks. Noticing his hesitation, Karen does not back down. She reminds him that she and Orca are also from the House of Forenad and also want to help protect their people, pleading with their elder brother. Seeing their determination, he finally gives in. Kirill agrees but sets strict conditions to come only when he says, and strictly forbids approaching the Adventurers Guild. Then he transforms into an adult adventurer Sice, puts on a mask, and tells them to remember this image. He sincerely draws a plan for their first outing. He will accept the task at the guild himself, while 2 will stand by the city gates, and then everyone will gather together and head into the forest. His instructions were met with joy. Karen and Orca celebrate the victory, high-five, and sincerely thank him. He watches them, quietly noticing how they are getting closer, but feels that this turn of events is completely unfortunate. But their excitement is short-lived. As soon as Orca sees the sheet with the task, he explodes. They were deceived, and Cyril calmly explains that there was nothing on the board, monster hunting, so he found a completely valid gathering request. When everything is settled, they head into the forest. Kirill, again in his young form, points to their goal, a certain plant, and explains how to collect it properly. The girls look around and slowly realize the task is difficult because those plants do not grow in bunches. He reassures them it is not difficult at all and gives a hint. All living beings, even plants, carry mana within themselves. His words seem to light a bulb. Orca exclaimed, suddenly realizing that each species must have its own unique signature person. Karen activates her mana sight, and her perception of the forest changes. The world around dims, and the plants she is looking for pulse with a gentle, unmistakable light. Her success immediately paints a focused expression on her face, and when Orca sees this, a competitive fire ignites in him. He declares that he will find his herbs himself, and challenges her to a competition to see who gathers more. She immediately gets to work, joyfully calls Cyril, saying she found a large patch of herbs, points to more plants over there, and here her excitement is visible. Cyril looks at her and says he will take the other side of the clearing. His observation is cut short when Karen suddenly becomes alert. She notices a pack of gray wolves and counts 4, but Orca calmly corrects that there are 5. This surprises Cyril. He realizes that Orca's senses are sharper than Karen's despite her longer experience, and asks them if they have scanned the area with their mana to track monster packs. He notices that they are forgetting something very important. Karen and Orca lower their gazes, and he continues his lesson, explaining that today their carelessness will still pass because he is nearby, but in the future, when they form a group with others, roles must be assigned correctly. He realizes their mistake. They were so absorbed in gathering that they forgot to keep watch. This is a bitter reminder they are in a dangerous forest. Quietly and with final certainty, he tells them that the gray wolves will soon notice them. With weapons at the ready, Orca and Karen stand prepared. Orca resolutely addresses Kirill as Wanasima and begs to be given a chance to correct an old mistake, and Karen picks up they will do everything they can and asks him, whom she calls Exai, to watch over them. He agrees to their request with a calm smile, adding that he will intervene anyway if the situation becomes too dangerous. Filled with determination, both girls shout their agreement. With his permission, they rush forward. Orca notices that the approaching pack of wolves has split into 3 groups. Karen quickly comes up with a plan, first to draw the central group out of the fight to avoid being surrounded. Orca immediately agrees and targets 2 wolves in the middle. Karen decides to act herself and releases a fire arrow. A magical projectile hits one of the wolves directly and instantly engulfs the beast in flames. When the rest of the wolves charge the attack, Orca defends. An ice wall rises from the ground, breaking free and blocking their path. Standing at a safe distance, Cyril carefully watches their coordinated work and immediately understands. Orca is support, and Karen attacks with fire magic, so their strategy is logical, but his observation is interrupted by the howl of a lone wolf, who is clearly calling for reinforcements. His senses sharpen, he detects the approach of danger, roughly counts about 20 more enemies still out of the girl's perception range. Outwardly, he decides everything is fine as long as they notice nothing, but inwardly he knows. This is too many for them so early. Before the new threat could reach the children, a powerful shot rang out. The pack leader of the reinforcements was instantly killed, his body torn apart by an invisible projectile, and empty magical shells scattered on the ground. The attack was his. Kirill recalls that earlier he could make only 1 shot, but now he can fire as many as his mana allows, and looking at the field of fallen wolves, he is sure few spells are stronger than this. He stands among the fallen creatures and evaluates his abilities. The spell is still a bit slow, so he wants to make it as fast as a shot. Since the bullet's power depends on mana spent, he decides to increase both the power of a single shot and the total mana reserve, knowing he can still improve. He watched as Orca joyfully celebrated the victory, confirming they had killed the last wolf and impatiently asking if he had seen it, while Karen and Orca turned to him and waited for an answer, as the last beast eerily stuck on a magical stone spike. When Orca shouted with joy, Karen knelt beside one of the fallen creatures. From her cupped hands slowly flowed a gentle, ethereal light, and she quietly whispered a prayer. Orca then turned to him and asked if they should take the magical stones from the beasts. He listened as Karen explained her actions, saying she wanted to take full responsibility for the lives she had taken, and added that she would not mind if he did it when the task became too difficult for her. He watched and suddenly realized Karen had become much more mature than he expected. When they were walking through the forest, he praised both girls for how their magic had improved and admitted that it surprised him. Orca beamed with pride, and then he casually added that he had dealt with the reinforcement called by one of the wolves. This stunned Karen and Orca. They demanded to know how he managed to do it so that they didn't even notice, and he just laughed. He left unafraid. Orca eagerly asked him to teach them his technique during the next hunt. He agreed and promised to save the lesson for their next outing. Since then, the 3 of them regularly went hunting magical beasts, step by step gathering combat experience and growing stronger together. At that time, Cyril began keeping a written record of their progress and all events. He realized the longer he lived in this new world, the more memories of the game from his previous life faded, so to prevent them from dissolving, he began writing everything down. But the notes quickly stopped being simple records and turned into something like a political planner filled with reminders of duties, for example, to inspect the livestock on his lands. His notes also contained small, personal moments, for example, the day Karen first rode a horse. He quietly laughed, recording another episode how he caught Karen trying to remove food she didn't like from her plate and pretend nothing happened. At that moment, he realized that his detailed notes had turned into a parent's diary. He stared at the open book, his face tightened with determination. The time he had been waiting for was rapidly approaching. Later, returning home with Karen and Orca, a strange anxiety overwhelmed him. Shion greeted them warmly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong and was tormented by the thought that something might have happened at the castle, while Karen was more concerned with the usual asking for a snack and to repeat the lesson a little more. At the meeting, his suspicion was confirmed when Shion brought a report. The Northern Noble Alliance of the 2 kingdoms had unleashed a conflict by attacking Count Galbad and his 3 family branches. The news struck Orca with personal horror. He whispered in despair about his family. Karen, realizing the terrible consequences, was stunned, and Cyril's face became grim. What he had predicted had finally happened. Shion brings heavy news. In the northeastern corner of the Sacred Kingdom, a civil war has erupted among the nobility. Count Galbad and his 3 family branches were attacked, and the news hits Orca with a devastating blow. He understands that his own family is among those targeted. Nearby, Karen senses a change in the air and looks anxiously at her brother Cyril. Later, during tea time, which was supposed to be pleasant, the tension still hung in the air. Kara noticed that her brother was distracted and asked why he wasn't eating anything. He sincerely explained the seriousness of the situation to Orca, confirming that his native home, the barony of Bayakudai, is ruled by one of the attacked family branches, and Cyril mentally connects these events with the plot of the game he remembers, realizing. This conflict is the culmination of years of intrigues by the monotheistic Fuensol family, which long sought to destroy the polytheistic Galbatis. He recalls this war as a turning point in history, one that affected not only Orca, but many other important characters. Cyril is internally torn by a dispute. His main goal is to prevent the death of Karen, who is not at all connected to this civil war, but interference would earn him enemies among the monotheists, who, upon learning about her light nature, might target her. And direct help to the Galbata family would be a de facto declaration of war. It would drag the royal house in and leave his family surrounded by enemies, so he decides that direct intervention is too risky. He delivers this cold calculation, saying that the Bayakudi barony is too far away to worry about. Karen whispered his name in disbelief. Orca is forced to smile, his tail twitching nervously as he insists that he understands and that Cyril is right. She immediately lunges at her brother, her voice cutting with anger. "How can you say that?" she exclaims, pointing out that Orca's family could die. Orca tries to calm her, asks Cyril not to worry, and says that their father and brother warned him about this and that he is fine, but his tense facial expression says otherwise. Overwhelmed with emotions, Orca apologized to Karen, canceled their lesson, and rushed up the main stairs, saying he would be in his room. In the commotion, Karen stumbled and fell. Cyril called Orca to wait, but he had already fled. His gaze hardens as he turns to Shion. He orders her to have his spies double their efforts, but again emphasizes direct intervention is strictly forbidden. Shion meets his gaze and simply asks, "Are you sure?" Her voice echoes in the now empty hall, confirming the orders, "Yes, as you wish." Night fell on the estate, and the room was drowned in darkness. Only faint moonlight barely penetrated through the window. He collapses onto the bed and lets out a long, tired sigh. Nearby Orca is bent over, tormented by the thought that he knew it was inevitable and now wonders why he only feels its burden now. His mind races with cold calculations. If he leaves Orca's family and lets events unfold as in the game he remembers, he can almost guarantee Karen's safety, a harsh but logical choice. Switched off, filled with irritation, he sharply jumps up and sits upright, cursing the whole situation. Opposite him, Orca looks up, his face aching with sadness, but there is humility in it, and he reassures Cyril, saying he already knew it would be this way and that he is fine. He pauses for a moment, pulls himself together, and thinks about the benefit of his mental magic. It allows him to restrain feelings, a necessary tool for an adult mind trapped in a child's body. He is ashamed to behave this way, and he reflects that a true hero would not be tormented by such doubts. To calm his nerves with tea, he gets out of bed and, approaching the door, apologizes for the late hour and asks what is the matter. At the door stand Karen in a simple nightgown and Shion. Karen raises her wide open, worried eyes to him and quietly calls him by name. In the quiet room, Karen gently sipped from the cup and handed it to Cyril, explaining that it was chamomile, which would help him fall asleep. When they sit in his luxurious chambers, she suddenly reveals the real reason for the nighttime visit. She wants to talk about the real Orca family, the Bayakudai barony, and Cyril, tired, simply asks, "Why?" She looks down at the table, with a pleading expression on her face, and asks if he can send them help in their current conflict. He, with pain on his face, says that watching Orca put on a tired, forced smile is incredibly sad, but insists that they cannot be guided by feelings. This will lead to the family losing all their political allies. He presses her, reminding her that he currently effectively holds power in the Fornada family and must protect their land, asking if she really wants to put people in danger. Defeated, Karen quietly admits that he is right. His mask of confidence cracks for a moment, and that incredible burden bursts out mentally. He admits that Karen's expectations crush him and he cannot endure it. She does not give in, resolutely asks if he understands that sending reinforcements back could cost the lives of their own knights, and if he is ready to be responsible for that, reminding him that he previously promised to help. Although she knows that as a lady she cannot allow harm to the family, the painful smile of Orca has imprinted in her memory, and she catches herself thinking about the excuses she invents. Her voice softens from the memory. She admits that on the day he carried her home, she was consumed by unbearable sadness and guilt because she kept making mistakes and causing him trouble, and that feeling was killing her from the inside. He raises his eyes, stunned by her confession, and she continues, reminding him that he never blamed her, but instead taught her an important lesson that brothers and sisters love and support each other. She makes her final argument, looks him straight in the eyes, and asks, "Is that whole lesson a lie?" She reminds him that Orca is their beloved younger brother. Stunned and confused, Cyril silently finally admits that he understands, and in his mind appears the image of the three of them holding hands. The last words of his sister hung in the air quietly but categorically. If he refused to help, she would leave. She stated this clearly with iron determination. She would go to Orca and save his family herself. Karen turned and headed for the door. Cyril shouted loudly for her to wait, but she simply apologized and left, leaving him alone in the room. In the room, he fell to the floor and sighed heavily in despair, crouched down and began to doubt his actions, not understanding what he was doing at all. Covering his face with his palm, he forced himself to admit he had just exploded, pouring out his deeply hidden anxieties on Karen. Suddenly it dawned on him. He was her older brother, and the duty of an older brother was to lie to little sisters to protect them from the harsh realities of the world. Finally deciding, he found Shion in the corridor. He began to explain the situation with Karen, but the maid calmly interrupted him, saying she already knew. He turned back without saying a word and walked resolutely down the long dark corridor. Shion walked closely behind, and he moved forward with a new, sharp sense of urgency. Stopping abruptly, he called Shion and announced, "Immediately gather a meeting to plan how to save Baron Bakode and his family." He ordered her to call all the important people and send another maid to gather them, emphasizing that time was short. He began to lay out his plan and gave Shion a stunning first order. She was to inform the royal palace about Karen's light magic. This instruction shocked Shion. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She could barely comprehend this order. When the master of the house and his wife are indifferent to their home, a mountain of papers falls on others' shoulders, and the right to decide is given to others. In a luxurious office, an old aristocrat named Sue works diligently at his desk, and slightly irritated, thinks that since it turned out that Carolina is his saint, the views and rules of the older generation have returned. Nearby at a smaller desk sits young Cyril, focused on his affairs, when suddenly a sharp knock sounds at the door. The man raises his gaze as the door creaks open, as if granting permission to enter. Cyril stands in the doorway, looking up at him and asking if he may come in for a moment. Then he addressed the man with stunning familiarity, calling him Sushin. With a determined smile, Cyril proposed to make a deal. In a moment he enters the huge conference hall, and surprise flashes across his face. Shion, by the entrance, says he is the last. Around the long table, the council of men is already seated, and Cyril does not understand why everyone has gathered, since he thought no one else needed to work today. To his unspoken question, one of the advisors respectfully replied, "We suspected Lord Zex would inevitably send troops." Sitting at the head of the table, Cyril notices that Sue stands behind and demands to know why he decided so. He calmly replies that he has already explained his choice, sees no point in sending aid, and from his honored seat firmly states, "It is right not to interfere in internal strife." But Sui's continues, his tone unwavering, "We still remember the ex-lord of that day." He leans closer, his face stern, asking what Cyril intends to do, brushing him off as a mere 6-year-old without power and without weight. Suez declares that they are not foolish enough to allow childish changes in the budget. He was forced to admit that he was indeed powerless, but as a bearer of Fornadat blood, he could still make a decision, something even a 5-year-old child would do. Again standing before the council, he listened as Sue was mockingly asked what he would do, maybe run to his father. Cyril calmly stated that at first he chose the path of compromise and concessions, but now the decision was his. He laid out an updated proposal. Instead of old customs, he offered compensation, urged not to remain silent if someone disagreed, said he wanted to hear their thoughts and asked to trust him and his parents. It seemed his words had an effect. A clerk in a striped robe approached the table and handed over a list of public investments. The man noted that everything was clearly arranged by importance and advised Cyril to act accordingly, to which the young lord thanked. When he took the document, his sharp gaze immediately noticed a discrepancy. He directly pointed to the entry. It was clear that the budget had been tampered with for several years. The clerk reacted stunned and promised to immediately show it to the master, but Cyril knew that they had long turned a blind eye to this injustice. He thought that even if they wanted to change, they lacked the necessary resources, and if they continued to pretend, he would get rid of them in due time, while Sue stood aside and simply asked if this was acceptable. Meanwhile, on the training ground, the captain of the guard fiercely fought with young Dan, and their wooden swords clanged so loudly that the blows could shatter a nearby stone column. From the neighboring doorway, the excited Karen cheered them on, shouting for her older brother to try his best. The captain of the guard proudly flexed his muscles in front of the children, boasting that his strength was proof of his good training. Inspired, Dan took a dramatic pose with his wooden sword and loudly declared that he would show Lady Caroline how cool he was. Watching from the side, Cyril's cheeks blushed slightly. From the high window overlooking the courtyard, Sue watched everything. He shouted words of encouragement down to the rascals, "Go ahead, don't be shy," and promised to add good wine to their dinner if they lost. Because of his actions, Cyril found himself alone, standing and pondering the consequences. Gradually he began to lead the council members forward, and Sue stood nearby step by step toward his goal. He explained to the captain of the guard that his goal was to prove that he was worthy to be entrusted with the future of Forlunata. Later, Sue commented on Kirill's audacity, noting that no one expected him to use information about the Orca family as leverage. He guessed it was out of concern for his sister, and Kirill himself, sitting opposite, wondered whether it was really acceptable to be guided by such personal feelings. But the council members had already decided and openly stated that they fully trusted him. In him, although he himself knew everything was much more complicated, Cyril accepted their support with a determined smile, thanked them, and promised to use their strength. Then his thoughts turned to the practical details of the plan. He considered the long road to the Baekudai territory a month in a carriage, and aloud doubted whether they would arrive, and Karen from the bed offered a solution she would use her light magic there. Proposal caught him off guard. The idea of now using Karen's light magic was stunning. The same feeling was read on the faces of the stunned advisors at the table. The council erupted in protest. People demanded to know when this was discovered, shouted that they were not informed about it, and that the news was too sudden to handle internally, but Cyril remained calm in the midst of the uproar. Then he turned to the Frank council and calmly said that his real, trunk hard, was much more useful than they imagined, and this revelation made them shout his name in surprise. When the council, albeit reluctantly, finally agreed, preparations for the long journey began near the main gates. Under the massive stone walls of the estate, a bustle raged. Wagons were being loaded, horses harnessed, the crowd was noisy, and everyone was ready to set off on the month-long journey to the Baekudai territory.